I'm just okay, so not today. Yeah. Okay.
All right, everyone. Good morning. My name is Joaquin Esquivel. I'm Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Tuesday, August 20th. It is 9:14 a.m., and I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues. Joining us virtually is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo and Board Member Laurel Firestone. Joining us here in person this morning is Board Member Nicole Morgan and Board Member Sean McGuire. Joining us as well virtually is our Executive Director, Eric Oppenheimer. And joining us here in person are our two Chief Deputies, Karen Mogus and Jonathan Bishop. From the Office of Chief Counsel, we have Ann Hartridge. Our Clerk of the Board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her today is Margie Argel, Biba Malatik, Susan Reyes, and Elizabeth Carrillo. As you can see, this is a hybrid meeting with both in-person and virtual components. For those of you joining us virtually, you're either viewing us through our customary live webcast on YouTube Live or the Cali PA website. But if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to be on the Zoom platform. There are instructions on how to do so, a link at the top of today's agenda. If you're having any challenges, though, getting onto the Zoom platform, please do email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help get you onto the platform. Once you are on the platform, your camera will be off. You'll be on mute until is your opportunity to speak on the item you've indicated. For everyone in the room, good to see you all. Good morning. We're here in the California Environmental Protection Agency building in Sacramento. A few announcements for us as well. Please do observe the exits. If we happen to have an emergency, we'll calmly file out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await further instruction. Additionally, if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to sign up to do so. There is a QR code on the side of the room. There's also a laptop in order to facilitate that. Once you are at the mic, please do introduce yourself and any affiliation you have. And lastly, please do silence any phones just so that we can have an uninterrupted discussion this morning. We'll begin this morning as we customarily do with public forum, and we'll quickly go to my public forum list here. I believe our first commenter here is Mary Wood. Good morning, Ms. Wood. And the mic will be off, so there's a button at the base. You can, once the light's on, you're good to go.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and esteemed board members. My name is Mary Wood, and I am here to speak for myself and 6 million Californians who belong to private public water systems who could be experiencing obstructions to their right to safe, affordable, and accessible water. Today, I am centering my concerns around accessible and affordable water. In 1746, Ben Franklin said, "When the well's dry, we know the worth of water. Sadly, I have had firsthand knowledge of what he meant because since November 4th, 2020, I have had no water service to my restaurant or cabin, which has rendered my property useless, uninhabitable, and unsellable. You may ask, how did this happen? Aren't there protections in place? And I say no, unless I was a member of the California Public Utility Commission, which oversees large public utilities, who has an online complaint process, regulates services, contract rate structures, and protects consumers. So who am I supposed to go to? I go to the county, I go to the state. I've gone to RCAC, Cal Rural, RDN. I think I've done all my homework. And everybody says, we need you to go to the judicial system. And my problem with the judicial system is we're shifting these responsibilities for huge water decisions to them. Water right questions, utility water contract issues, and water rates. To make matter worse, there is no single formula to establish rate structures because of the uniqueness of each system. If there's no measuring standard or accepted methodology throughout the water utility industry, how is a judge supposed to make a decision on a simple, unmetered, no electricity water system, which the defendants say the commercial property without benefit of a meter uses 50% of the water, therefore they need to pay 50% of all dues and special assessments. And we've had special assessments every year since 2018. From this time of my legal dispute, which started in 2017, I reportedly owed the association $23,250 just for water, plus $5,074 in interest, and which totals approximately $28,300. During the same 7 years, the residential properties paid approximately $3,300. That's $25,000. They're charging me more than what they paid. Finally, it is said one person can make a difference, and that's why I'm here. I'm hoping that let me be that person who motivates everyone to understand we have to have affordable rate structures to have accessible water, and I have neither. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wood. I appreciate your comments this morning in public forum, and do understand you're having challenges with a private water system. And here, again, our folks will do what they can to be helpful to your issues. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I believe that brings us to the end of public forum commenters. And then so we can now move on to board business. The first item of board business this morning is consideration of adoption of the August 6th, 2024 board meeting minutes. Looking to my fellow board colleagues in case there are any adjustments, amendments, and/or a motion.
I move to adopt the August 6th minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Sorry, I'm just checking to see if PD is gone. Okay. Board Member Morgan. Abstain. And Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Board meeting minutes are adopted. And now brings us to item number 2, which is currently an uncontested item. Looking to the clerk just to double check that it's still uncontested. Seeing that it is, just want to thank everyone for the good work on the item. But then otherwise, I think we may be prepared for a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt item number 2.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call roll call vote?
Board Member Morgan.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Board Member
Aye.
Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Item is carried. And again, thank you everyone for the good work on it. Next, we will move into an informational item. And this is now an item to hear progress and update on the implementation of the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program regulations adopted by the board. We give a moment for folks to come up. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, board members. So I'm Christine Sotelo, the program manager for California ELAP, and we're really excited to be here to give you a progress report on 3 years after the adoption of the ELAP regulations. And we're going to split the presentation between me and Jennifer McLaren. So she's going to tee it off. We think that this is a really good time to have our update. It's been 10 years since the program has moved over from CDPH. The anniversary was July 1st, 2024. So we think this is a good time to tell you about how the program has been what we've been up to for the last 10 years. Take it away, Jennifer.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer McLaren. I'm the accreditation officer at ELAP, where my main job function is to provide compliance assistance to laboratories, answer questions, and assist them through the accreditation process. I'm excited to be here presenting before the board for the first time to share the ELAP progress update after 3 years of the new laboratory regulations. Next slide, please. Like Christine mentioned, I'll be starting off the presentation and then she will be finishing the last half. Next slide, please. ELAP is a diverse team of scientists with varying specialties that can offer technical expertise in laboratory and regulatory science. We investigate fraud and inappropriate laboratory practices and are the largest state laboratory accreditation program in the country, with over 500 laboratories that generate data for state regulatory agencies. Next slide, please. Just over 10 years ago, as Christine mentioned, ELAB moved to the State Water Board. The program was plagued by problems at that time. An expert review panel was commissioned to evaluate ELAP, and in order to accomplish the panel's recommendations, we had to do a comprehensive regulatory update. Next slide, please. ELAP produced 3 administrative drafts and worked with ELAP's advisory bodies and stakeholders to create the new regulations that were adopted by the board in 2020 with an effective date of January 1st, 2021, and included a 3-year ease-in to TNI with an effective date of January 1st, 2024. ELAP has committed to providing compliance assistance to laboratories as they transition to the new requirements, as well as providing annual updates to the board along the way. Next slide, please. There are some areas of the regulations that saw more significant changes, including adding detail to old vague regulations, requiring the use of third-party auditors for laboratories that use sophisticated instruments, and incorporating the TNI standard and its quality management requirements in January 1st, 2024. Next slide, please. ELAP has provided extensive compliance assistance to laboratories that began with the Roadmap to Accreditation Initiative, board-sponsored TNI trainings, mentorship, and ELAP's annual laboratory conference. I'll talk about each of these in more detail in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So the Roadmap to Accreditation campaign provided many avenues for laboratories to learn what the new regulations would require. With the introduction of third-party auditors, each of these TPA agencies held webinars to familiarize the laboratory community with their services. ELAP revamped its website to improve the user experience. This also provided an opportunity for us to add an FAQ section, detailed timelines, provide templates, and post infographics to help labs in their journey. ELAP also held one-on-one transition appointments with 150 laboratories to provide individualized guidance on their path to compliance. Next slide, please. The State Water Board contracted with an expert training firm, A2LA Workplace Training, to provide a best in the country free opportunity for our laboratories to help them develop required documentation. We held 20 of these sessions and approximately 30 people joined each event. In addition to the HULA training that was provided, ELAP staff also attended many of these meetings to answer additional questions. Next slide, please. At these sessions, laboratories were provided with fillable templates, at-a-glance guides of requirements, extensive written instruction on development of materials, and examples to copy from or to adapt to fit their laboratory. The recordings are also posted on ELAP's YouTube page for laboratories to continually reference and will remain there indefinitely. Next slide, please. ELAP hosts an annual conference that is currently in its 4th year. Our team enjoys being creative with the themes each year. Last year, as we approached the January 1st TNI deadline, our theme was ready to launch. The conference this year focused on how ELAP and the laboratory community have continued to evolve after the new regulations took effect in 2024. ELAP staff, LTAC members, and laboratory professionals came together to present topics of interest to the laboratory community. This event has been well received by the laboratory, and we routinely see over 300 participants each day of the conference. Next slide, please. This year's ELAP conference was unique in that we were able to hold an in-person extra day at the National Environmental Monitoring Council Conference at the beginning of August, where the theme was reliable data for sound decision-making. The conference returned to California this year so that our laboratories could more easily attend. The conference recorded its highest attendance ever, and there were approximately 150 registrants for California Day. Topics included program updates, TPA program details, ELAP enforcement program information, a panel on laboratory assessments, and much more. It was exciting to see California laboratories that are participating in the TNI by sitting on committees, developing the standards, and also attending conferences to be part of the national conversation. And a special thank you to Board Member Firestone for being a keynote speaker at our first ELAP conference back in 2021, and to Board Member McGuire for giving the keynote address on California Day at the NEMC conference just a few weeks ago. Next slide, please. ELAP previously implemented a mentorship program to pilot TNI in several small remote laboratories. This model was so successful that it was adopted nationally. ELAP senior staff worked with TNI to help them develop their national version. On the right, you can see a list of several of the smaller laboratories that participated in the program. Next slide, please. While nothing is perfect, ELAP has seen the payoff for all of the compliance assistance provided to laboratories. Apologize for the slight typo on the slide. We recognized approximately 140 laboratories, roughly 25% of our laboratory population, that had successfully implemented TNI before the January 1st, 2024 deadline. To celebrate their accomplishment, ELAP sent them honorary certificates and posted their names on our Roadmap to Accreditation webpage. These laboratories have shown that TNI compliance is not only possible, but also that it could be completed in the less than 3-year timeline than the regulations allowed. Next slide, please. And then now I will hand it back to Christine.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. But before I start, I do want to acknowledge Emily Roberts. She's our attorney from the Office of Chief Counsel. We couldn't do any of the work we do without their guidance. So thanks for being here, Emily. So I'm going to go over what we've observed over the last 3 years, and I'll cover these topics in the next slides. Next slide. So laboratories have been steadily relinquishing their accreditation since the program moved over from CDPH, and we saw a slight uptick in number of labs relinquishing their accreditation when the regulations were adopted in 2020. So we've had a total of 30% of our total population relinquish their accreditation since the program moved over. We anticipated the last event to exert any influence on our population would have been January 1st, 2024, when the regulations became effective. If you all recall, there was a 3-year implementation period from adoption, and we believe that there would potentially be some declining of accreditations. Next slide. This is a graphic of what I just talked about. You can see that even before the regulations were adopted, we were seeing relinquishment of accreditation certificates. And just illustrates that the regulations didn't make a huge impact on the decline of population. Next slide. The next item I want to talk about is, despite the reduction of the laboratory population, we're still meeting our regulatory testing needs. So ELAB exists for state agency programs to use labs for their monitoring programs, and we've not received any information or have been reached out by any programs that they can't find laboratories to do their testing. So that's a very important point to make. In fact, we believe our regulations helped our program become more flexible and offer the relevant methods that the state agency program needs, for example, PFAS. And we're in the next couple of weeks, we'll be offering 1633, which is the most recent method that EPA has adopted for PFAS. We believe also that the regulations have allowed us to become the first in the world to offer microplastics testing in drinking water. So that provided a lot of flexibility and our ability to provide the methods that our agencies need to do their testing. Next slide. And we're tracking our accreditation certificates closely. We're committed to monitoring laboratories that potentially could be on the fringe of relinquishing their accreditation. We wanted to show you a map of our accredited laboratories. The green dot shows all the laboratories in California. As you can see, it covers the vast majority of the state. We have a huge laboratory hub of laboratory concentrations in Northern California and in Southern California. And the pink dots show the laboratories that relinquished their accreditation from March 2023 to 2024. We wanted to show this on a map so that you can see there isn't a trend of concentrations of labs relinquishing their accreditation in remote areas in California. And we don't have a holding time issue where laboratories can't get their samples to a laboratory within California. So we don't see an issue at this time, but we're watching. Next slide. The next topic I wanted to talk about is compliance of the T&I standard. So I'm really proud of the laboratories in California. They've done a great job implementing the standard when it became effective in 2020. And as Jennifer mentioned, we have a lot of laboratories that decided to just crush the deadline and do it early. So 87% of our laboratories are implementing T&I. We have information from all of the reports that show they're in compliance. And in our review of the data, we have seen that about 10% of our laboratories they don't have an assessment report to T&I, and 3% we just don't know what's happening. But we believe that some of those laboratories could be relinquishing their accreditation, or they're just not up to speed with submitting their assessment reports or their applications to ELAB. Next slide. So the next topic I'd like to go over is the use of third-party assessment providers. So when the regulations were adopted in 2020, we rolled out a program to use third-party assessment to get third-party providers to do assessments at our laboratories. It has been very successful, so successful that a lot of our laboratories are using TPAs. 80% of the laboratories in California are opting to use third-party assessors. If you remember during the adoption of the regulations, a lot of the stakeholders and laboratories said it would be too difficult to utilize third-party assessors or contract with them, but that's not the case. We have some ideas of why this is happening. We think that because we have 4 third-party assessment providers with a lot of staff, they can move quickly and they have a lot of resources and capacity. They're probably trying to market their services widely. They have competitive costs, and because they have so many assessors, their customer service is probably faster than ELAB assessments. Next slide. So why is higher use of TPA providers important to us right now? Well, the stakeholders have said that if we don't have any more ELAB assessments, that will leave room for more staffing, and you could potentially decrease your staff in ELAB. That's not exactly the case. We wanted to really understand it, so we did a workload analysis of all of our staff, and what we found is that some of our staff are are doing a lot of work, but we're still not hitting our critical functions that are required in our state and regulatory laws. So even though we may be having less assessments, that doesn't mean we don't have the work to do. This is also important in fees because assessment predictions are part of our fee setting formula. So the continued downward trend in the use of ELAP assessments creates an instability in the way that the fee setting process works. So this could lead to an potential increase in fees if we don't capture the missing revenue from the ELAP assessments. Next slide. But we're watching and we're making sure that we keep an eye out on these two issues. So the laboratory population could continue to slow and decline in response to the cumulative cost of compliance. I want to just mention and remind everyone that we're still the biggest accreditation program in the nation. Our size and scale is like no other. And we tried to compare ourselves to other states, but it's really like apples and oranges. New York has 278 in-state labs, Texas 147, and Florida 206. It's still more than the other states that we could possibly compare us to. They're different size and population. They probably have a different environmental regulatory scheme, but we tried to just compare us, but we're just uncomparable to any other state. We're also watching the TPAs. If they capture the full assessment market, does it make sense for us to shift all of our assessments to them? This would create a more fee stability in how we evaluate our fee structure, and it could free up resources to do the things that I mentioned earlier that we weren't complying with within our statutes and regulations. Next slide. So I wanted to discuss the fee structure. So last year we told you that we would begin working with the stakeholders on a new or revised fee structure so that it would align with the other state board programs. So we worked with the Division of Administrative Services and created a stakeholder working group. If you recall, we initially pursued a volume-based fee model so that labs that were conducting the most regulatory sample work would pay per sample and their share of the work in California. But that idea was strongly opposed by small and big labs, commercial and municipal. Next slide. So we went back to the drawing board and we created an alternative with DAS. Our proposal adds tiers to the upper end of the current fee structure, there in gray or blue, however color you see. And the practical effects is that the labs with the largest numbers of accreditations pay more. So a majority of our laboratories will not see a fee increase with this proposal. It's not a perfect simulation of volume, but it gets really close. So it's the labs that do the most work and attach to the most FOAs on their certificate and what they pay for. And we'll propose this to you for consideration in September with Division of Administrative Services fee branch. Next slide. And the last topic I want to update you on is something that we haven't talked to you before in the past formally, and I'll cover these topics in the next slide. Next slide, please. So the history of our enforcement program is that it never existed before. While at CDPH, over the 30 years that it resided there, they may have taken enforcement action here and there sporadically, but they didn't have a formal enforcement unit. And the reason why the program moved over from CDPH was triggered by a case that the Office of Enforcement discovered. They discovered that a laboratory could potentially be committing fraud and have inappropriate laboratory practices. So they approached the administration at the time and said, could you please investigate this? Our data is reliant on this and our programs need good data for decision making. And because there wasn't any formal enforcement unit there, they couldn't act on it. And that was really the trigger point to pull ELAP over because so many state agencies and so many programs within the Water Board rely on it. Interesting enough, our very first case which was a criminal conviction and a civil penalty was the case that was referred to CDPH. So the history of enforcement in the lab community is one of uncertainty and fear. They never knew that there could be an enforcement program that could help them, that they were just fearful of any sort of enforcement. So that's kind of the sentiment in the community. So we never really publicized it too much. We worked a little bit under the radar with the Office of Enforcement. Next slide. But I wanted you all to know that our enforcement aligns with the rest of the Water Board's enforcement philosophy. The goal of enforcement is compliance for protection of public health and the environment. And we provide tools and assistance, training, guidance, for example, advisories to other laboratories. But at some point, cooperative approach can't work or doesn't work. And so a more forceful approach of enforcement is required. Next slide. So I wanted to give you a snapshot of the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years. We've received a lot of referrals and they've increased over the years. We actually have a backlog because it's such a manual process to investigate labs and review data reports. Primarily, our referrals come from state agency programs, and the majority come from the Division of Drinking Water. Maybe because we're within the division, and we've just educated DDW a lot over the years, so they know that we're there at the ready to help them. Next slide. And the impacts, we think, are pretty good. We've got over 300 referrals over the last 10 years. We've issued NOVs, we've revoked accreditations, we've suspended laboratories, we've taken low-level staff enforcement action with the staff letters, and we have citations totaling over $428,000. And we think that the impacts are great because it provides compliance assistance to laboratories through our enforcement advisories. Enforcement is a deterrent to laboratories. They don't want to do, or they don't want what happened to that lab to happen to them. And it levels the playing field for good actors. So one lab, it doesn't have an advantage over the other because, like an economic advantage, because they spend money on compliance and the other lab doesn't. We think that it's better confidence in the data and for protection of public health and the environment. Next slide. And just like everything else in ELAP, we're always looking to the future and to continuously improve. We really want to pursue some sort of technological solution like software to review data electronically to identify red flags. We do everything manually. And as you can imagine, reviewing hundreds of data reports is a very time-intensive task. And so there is software out there to review data and identify red flags so we can focus in on the reports and the laboratories that need the most attention. We also want to further educate the board and our agency partners on how to review data. They're the eyes and the ears, and we can't look at every data report from every single program within all of the state agencies that use ELAP. So the more that we can educate other board programs, we can take action on labs that are not complying. If you remember, I mentioned DDW was the highest referral rate. We want to see a higher level of referrals from other regional boards and other state agency programs. And then the last thing is we want to align ourselves with other state regulations and statute. For example, the underground storage tank statute allows for reimbursement of enforcement activities, as well as the Division of Drinking Water does as well. And we think that that would be good so that the good laboratories don't have to pay for the resources that go to the bad actors in the community. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you so much for having us present, and we're happy to take any questions.
Huge thanks to you, Ms. Otello, Ms. McLaren, and Ms. Roberts, and the team behind all of this work. It'll be 8 years here nearly that I've been on the state board, and recall, very much the early discussions and the tension, frankly, with the lab community around the transition to TNI. But I think what we can all agree was that it was needed work. And just really appreciate the way you've approached implementation, where there has been a tremendous amount of support to labs, especially small labs, but really better developing a community within the laboratory, labs within the state, importantly for just the culture and the importance of ultimately the data that the labs are developing for ourselves as decision makers. So just really appreciate that support, and also just an eye toward capacity. I think there is a lot of concern from the dais and from others that we would really see in this transition an inability to be able to meet regulatory requirements and permit requirements, and see a thinning of labs to a point where there was some concern. And because of your continued good oversight of the process, feel confident that we're still able to meet the demands of the state, even as there's been some pruning, if you will, and I think rightfully likely so, if folks aren't able to meet TNI standards. And so just want to express my thanks. I know we're here continuing to improve on the program, open to the lab community's feedback as we do so, but definitely see these last years as very much a success. And again, because of really the spirit of compliance assistance that has been part of this, and to your point though as well, enforcement, ensuring that there is a continuum between support to the labs and ultimately a level playing field all amongst them. So just hats off across all the work. Looking to see, and I don't think I have any straight up questions at this point, but looking to see from fellow board members any comments or questions. And if not, we also have a few commenters that we can begin to go to. Let's go ahead and call up our first commenter. I believe our first commenter here will be Sushmitha Reddy. And we have, and I don't know if he's yet on the platform, but next speaking after that, Adam Wachtel, be followed then by Spencer Sachs.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel.
Good morning.
I'll choose not to speak today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, I believe we can go to Spencer Sachs, be followed by Debbie Mackey.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair and members. Spencer Sachs on behalf of CASA, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. CASA represents over 130 agencies and municipalities that engage in the collection, treatment, recycling, and resource recovery in wastewater. We appreciate the opportunity to comment on this item, and we thank staff for the update. We also want to thank the board and ELAP staff for providing support to our members by hosting workshops and providing templates for the new requirements. There are three general comments that we would like to make today. For our first comment, CASA testified last year that LTAC has been underutilized, and now LTAC has not had a meeting in over a year. If LTAC was utilized as it's supposed to be, the meetings could be a great venue for the ELAP program to have direct access to the regulated community and the laboratory community to support ELAP technically, as intended in the Health and Safety Code, including supporting ELAP if there has been any capacity issues due to decreased participation in the program. Second, we'd like to share a few observations that we've heard from our members in the field. Small municipal labs are reporting that they have been struggling with keeping up on the TNI requirements due to the administrative burden and not having sufficient staffing and budgetary resources. Perhaps LTAC could be a venue to address these issues, similar to how numerous commercial labs provided mentorship to municipal labs when the regulations were first being adopted. As is, many labs relied on consultants to help with implementation, which then leads to increasing costs of compliance, and many more have added staff to keep up with the record-keeping burden. On that note, we have heard for third-party assessments, our members are reporting that there is a small pool of assessors, and the timing of the assessment has been a challenge. Based on what we've heard, what has been anticipated to be a 6-month timeline is now looking more like a 1 year to 9 month to 1 year timeline. So members have to schedule farther out, but this has resulted in some instances of certifications expiring before the TPA and ELAP's associated review. Additionally, there are still some concerns that we are hearing that are shared by the laboratory community, For example, labs continue to experience inconsistent findings and interpretations from assessors. Communications on field of accreditation updates are not 100% accurate, and labs are struggling to coordinate PT requirements and ELAP's expectations because they are depending on the first year or second year of the accreditation cycle. Finally, CASA has been tracking the changes in enrollment in the ELAP program and continues to monitor the reduction of labs. Even with the substantial decrease, CASA has not heard of any widespread reports of capacity problems. However, given the testimony today and the potential for the continuing relinquishment of labs, we ask and support the board to continue monitoring this situation and to make sure that the regulated and lab community is not reporting any capacity issues. Towards that end, with all the changes over the last several years, we are appreciative to the board and to ELAP staff for how they have addressed the program's funding. We understand the need to restructure how funding is sourced, and we're very appreciative of the ongoing discussions over the last year with the laboratory community and ELAP staff, and we wanted to share our appreciation for how they have managed these discussions to identify a consensus recommendation. With that, we greatly appreciate the opportunity to provide comments. We want to thank staff for their great work over the last year, and we look forward to continuing to work on this issue in the next year to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate those good comments and continued engagement, Mr. Sachs. Ms. Sotelo, just on the LTAC, just wondering if there's any update on kind of how we're viewing that group and how often it should be meeting.
Thank you for that comment, Spencer. We absolutely value LTAC. We have been tardy in scheduling a meeting. We recently had a meeting with the chair of LTAC, Judy Morgan, and we're scheduling a meeting soon. We're also sending letters to appoint new members. So it's really a lot of work and that we have that has kind of pushed the meeting of LTAC, but it will happen soon.
More than understandable, and appreciate that update. Thank you, Ms. Sotelo. Next, I think this is our final commenter. We'll have Debbie Mackey.
Morning, Chair Escobar, board members. My name is Debbie Mackey. I'm the Executive Officer of the Central Valley Clean Water Association. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit today and like Spencer Sachs did just a minute, give some perspective from the laboratory community of you know, kind of where we hope to see some things go and where and what we're seeing. So we just as perspective is we did see a decline and intention as these regulations were being developed and as they were being considered even before then of laboratories deciding that this was too much. And as you know, in the Central Valley, we have a lot of small facilities, small laboratories, small public laboratories, and we did lose a considerable number of them. We are still a little concerned and really want to watch carefully that capacity issue, especially as we're talking about some of the challenges that are being faced. And I really I want to say with the ELAP staff, really appreciate their last conference was excellent. They really tackled some great areas. I know that we're really trying to work together and try to find different solutions. So I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that aspect of it. What some of the challenges have been, as Spencer alluded to, is really with that with the third-party assessors, that pool getting smaller, that time frame getting longer, and really having a very, very strict time frame based upon the regulations as to when information can come in. And when you have to have things done, and having that in such a way that you're not going to be penalized because you're late with an application and other areas. So that's an area where I think ELAP even recognize that we hope to see some improvement. We do see the same thing as different interpretations, so getting a little bit more consistency in different assessments would be good. We also sometimes see problems with the PT samples or the samples that compare whether what you're measuring in the lab is what you should be measuring. And it's more of a bookkeeping, how, what numbers need to be used, and it really throws big kinks into accreditation and the ability of our labs to be able to do their job and to continue to be accredited, and not to have to very quickly turn and go to a private lab because now I'm not going to have a compliant lab. So it is a big concern and issue. The second issue I did want to touch again is on LTAC. It has been a year based upon LTAC's rules. We're supposed to be 3 times a year. Last year was the same problem. Actually, the chair is probably termed out based upon their standing rules. So it really is an organization that needs to be put back in there and uplifted. And we think that some of these issues that were alluded to today about improvements, those are some great things where that discussion can happen with technical experts and stakeholders. And then lastly, just want to bring up, a lot of the reason we got here was because EPA did an audit of ELAP, and there was work to be done there. And I'd love to hear more about what's happening and how ELAP's complying with its own assessment, like who's assessing them, what they're finding, and then increase the transparency so our lab community can really understand, especially as they see fees increasing and the amounts of increased fees that they have seen. I think Spencer told you a lot about the cost. The cost of the fees has been huge, but the cost of just implementing T&I and getting extra personnel, doing a lot of that work and doing the continuous work and paperwork that's required, and records keeping that's required is super significant, especially as you get to those smaller labs. So again, I really appreciate the presentation this morning. I hope that it will be posted because it's not really good resolution up here, but, and I'd like to see what's going on, but I really hope that we can strengthen and continue to strengthen the interaction between the laboratory community and ELAP as we go forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mackey. I appreciate those comments and agree that look to continue to strengthen the relationship and the discussion. And we will make sure that the slides are posted so folks can have those. And eventually we're supposed to get new screens behind us. So we'll see. Thank you. Really appreciate those comments. And again, just appreciate the engagement with the lab community. We have come a long way. The program, I know there was a lot of concern, just given how fundamental the work that our labs do for all the regulatory decisions and all the compliance checking that happens, not having a strong lab community, having questions and doubts, puts into question all of the work that we're doing here. So I appreciate everyone's patience as we've moved along and tried to do our best with balancing what are just international standards here and requirements that we feel are important to meet. And obviously then the real focus on implementation and needing to understand that we're trying to help support smaller labs here amongst then obviously the more capacity larger ones and have that right fit. So just really appreciate those comments and continued engagement. Looking to fellow board colleagues, if there's any questions or comments further on ELAP. Okay, we have come a long way then, because this would have been a lot longer item a few years back. Thank you so much, Ms. Sotelo. Thank you again, Ms. McClaren and Ms. Roberts. Really appreciate the update and look forward to following back up and hearing how the reboot of the LTAC is going. So thank you. All right, that concludes item number 4 and now brings us to item number 3 and brings us to item number 4, which is an item from our Division of Financial Assistance and is on the 2024-25 fund expenditure plan for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. Give a moment for folks to swap out here. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, members of the board. My name is Jasmine Oaxaca. I'm an acting Assistant Deputy Director of our Office of Sustainable Water Solutions in the Division of Financial Assistance. And to my left is our Deputy Director, Joe Karkowski, and also Lauren Marshall from the Office of Chief Counsel. Today, we're asking the board to consider adoption of the fiscal year 2024-25 fund expenditure plan for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. And again, I just wanted to acknowledge staff's tremendous work on this program the last 5 years. I think this is our perhaps fifth fund expenditure plan we're bringing to you today. Next, please. So as a reminder for everyone, these are the funding sources that we talk about when we refer to the Safe and Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience Drinking Water Program, or SAFER program. The program includes all funding sources that the State Water Board administers that can fund drinking water projects. And these range from capital planning and construction projects to non-capital projects such as interim water supplies, emergency repairs, technical assistance, administrators, and operation and maintenance, or O&M funding. And the program's array of funding sources includes various appropriations from the general fund, the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund at the top, and also a couple of drinking water general obligation bonds from previous years, such as Prop 1, 68, and 84. And then also a key player is our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Principal Forgiveness, which we'll hear more about later today, as well as some funding for emerging contaminants. Next, please. Shifting gears a little bit to our funding outlook for this fiscal year. So this slide totals all the funding sources we have available for the broader SAFER program to go towards drinking water projects totaling around $843 million. At least $655 million of that may be used for capital projects, although it's important to note that about 370 of that is specifically to address projects that address contaminants of emerging concern. So those might have additional eligibility requirements. And then I also wanted to note that if we project out for the next 5 years, there's an anticipated almost $2 billion of funding that will be available. And about $670 million of that would be coming from our Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. Next, please. So at the board workshop last month, we talked about a few refined SAFER program goals as we head into the last 5 years of the original 10-year appropriation of the $130 million. These refined goals are intended to focus our resources in a way that we can hopefully make the biggest impact in these last 5 years by addressing failing systems, promoting consolidations that include failing systems, and also get communities lasting solutions as swiftly as possible. And these goals translate into a few priorities, perhaps better coined as our parallel initiatives for this fiscal year, which are on the slide that I'm showing. These are not listed in ranked order, and our efforts will continue to focus on small disadvantaged communities and low-income households. We did want to draw attention to one modification to the third one on the list since receiving public comments, and that we wanted to highlight that where failing systems are being consolidated, we will support planning work where those projects can benefit nearby domestic well communities with contamination issues. Next, please. So next, I wanted to briefly revisit the current fiscal year's proposed funding targets for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, as well as a couple of funding scenarios for context. Next, please. For our proposed funding targets for this year's appropriation of 130 million, compared to the draft that was posted for public comment, we did shift about 10 million that was previously in the construction bucket for state smalls and domestic wells to the technical assistance category for a total of 20 million there. And this is to help increase capacity for planning efforts that would include consolidations of domestic well communities with potential contamination issues with nearby public water systems, as I mentioned earlier. Next, please. So this slide is not included in the fund expenditure plan and is being presented purely for context and comparison purposes. These are two scenarios here that we're looking at, showing a couple different ways to slice the pie when we look at a timeline of 5 years and consider the total of about 1.4 billion anticipated. So this would include 670 million from the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, and that is our most flexible funding source, which we can use for most of our, if not all, the funding solutions that we use for projects. And then another 540 million is from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Principal Forgiveness. This can be used for planning and construction. And then here in these scenarios, we're assuming only 200 million from the emerging contaminants funding would go towards small communities, just for illustrative purposes. And this would also be for construction projects addressing contaminants like 1,2,3 TCP, 1,4-dioxane, manganese, or PFAS. And so the two bar charts are showing a percentage of anticipated funding with the different colors representing the different solution types. Scenario 1 assumes that the construction funding would be for public water systems that would include projects to address small systems with costs under 200,000 per connection and schools, and possibly 5 consolidations that would include domestic well communities, as well as ongoing well replacement program funding. This scenario would also allow for some funding to continue to go towards technical assistance, where we are starting to do a lot of our planning work, and also to continue our regional interim assistance programs that are already in place. This scenario, however, would have minimal funding left for administrators or direct O&M funding. And then moving on to scenario 2, this one assumes that we would be funding construction projects for all small failing systems and schools. However, we wouldn't be funding any of our domestic well community consolidations in that scenario, nor would there be much for continuing those well replacement programs. And then this scenario would continue to provide technical assistance like the other one, but then would have minimal funding for interim water supplies or emergency repair projects. And then this scenario doesn't have any funding for administrators and direct O&M funding. Next, please. So now I wanted to move on to summarize some of the key updates to the fund expenditure plan text compared to the draft that was posted for public comment on June 24th. Next, please. So during the draft FEP's public comment period, we had 2 public meetings. the Safer Advisory Group meeting on July 11th, and also a board workshop on July 16th. We received 3 comment letters from the entities listed here. Next, please. So for the text being proposed today for adoption, these are the key revisions that were made based on comments. General updates were made to the tables and associated text to extend the reporting range out to June 30th, 2024, the end of the fiscal year. And as mentioned a few slides ago, we updated one of our fiscal year priorities to state the inclusion of planning for consolidations of domestic well communities with contamination issues. And also noting here the shift of 10 million from construction to technical assistance in anticipation of additional planning needs and feasibility studies for those domestic well communities. Next, please. We added a new subsection to discuss high-level progress of the post-2019 failing systems. The draft had previously only included information on systems that were on the failing list as of July 1st, 2019, or what we're calling the 2019 failing list. And then in the racial equity and environmental justice metric section, we made a few modifications based on feedback from our equity consultant. And the map showing the geographic distribution of committed funding was also updated, and I will show that in a few slides. Next, please. This slide shows a couple of other key comments that did not end up as revisions to the text, but are posted in our response to comments table on our website. For the direct operation and maintenance program, a comment recommended that systems with artificially low rates be considered. So this fiscal year, DFA staff will likely continue our Group 1 efforts that we talked about last year, and we'll continue to work through the list of eligible systems with water rates higher than 2.5% of the median household income, plus have a high affordability burden per the drinking water needs assessment. And then I did want to note here too for everyone that proposals for Group 2 scenarios, which are listed in the direct O&M program guidelines included as Appendix K, can be considered at any time. For the Expedited Drinking Water Grant Program, or EDWG, a comment inquired about future rounds of funding. And so I wanted to note that DFA staff are currently considering projects that are already in our application queue that could be eligible for a 4th round of the program, potentially funded by the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund this time, and expected by the end of 2024. And then lastly, another comment inquired about the status of the advanced pay guidelines. And DFA staff are close to finalizing these guidelines, and these will be incorporated into the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund's policy as Appendix D, and these are also expected by the end of this year. Next, please. So lastly, I wanted to share this new representation of our committed funding shown as red dots on the map on the left. And the bold line boundaries on that map are showing our 6 different Division of Drinking Water regulatory sections. And this is included in the Racial Equity Environmental Justice metrics section of the Fund Expenditure Plan. The table on the right provides a little more context on the total number of systems and the number of failing water systems in each DDW section, which would be the universe of water systems, if you will. And then the other columns compare the number of water systems with funding commitments along with the number of failing water systems with funding commitments. And so just very quickly, the data here shows that for Division of Drinking Water sections 3 and 4, they have the highest number of water systems and also the highest number of failing water systems. And we are also funding a higher proportion of those systems. And that ends up geographically in kind of the southern San Joaquin Valley. Next, please. And that concludes our presentation today. So at this time, we're open to taking any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Oaxaca. And just to echo your thanks for, I know the entire team that it takes to put together the fund expenditure plan every year. It seems hard to imagine it's been 5 years now, but each year the iteration off of the needs and the data within the assessment, within the fund expenditure plan, it just continued to improve, and just really appreciate the momentum that we have here, looking now then to the next 5 years in the program and the scenarios, kind of building out some options when it comes to how we might approach what is a tremendous amount of need, we know, and only a limited amount of funding. So just thank you. And thank you for the careful balance as every year, and trying to make sure that we're putting enough toward technical assistance, so we're creating that pipeline of projects to actually get to construction and be able to fund as well. I think it's always just a balance that we continue to need to strike within the program, and feel that it's been done very well. I don't have any questions off the top here, but looking to fellow board colleagues if there are questions or comment. And if not, we do have one commenter, and would like to then call up Angela Islas.
Hi, good morning, Chair Esquivel, all board members. Angela Islas here with Central California Environmental Justice Network. So definitely want to just give a huge shout out to the staff that worked really heavily on putting together this year's funding expenditure plan under SAFER. And I have been participating in a lot of the SAFER Advisory Group meetings, and also want to give a shout out to all of the advisory group members as well who had provided their input. And, you know, I do know that, you know, there is still a lot to consider around domestic well mitigation. Definitely, you know, there's been a lot of challenges with the community that I am supporting, who is going under hopefully consolidation through a study that, you know, we're looking to get full support from the residents to consider. But I know for their kind of circumstances, you know, being all domestic wells, services do tend to get very challenging. And a lot of those residents, when they're approached about solutions to how they're going to, in the long term, receive water, I think that that's something that, you know, I would hope that with this year's funding expenditure plan, that there is consideration looking into how we can still continue to expand services for residents that, you know, are struggling to really figure out what long-term really means for their wells. You know, in this case, for this community, they are considering consolidation, which is awesome. But, you know, this also speaks for other domestic well communities that, you know, when receiving services and then, you know, their year term is over, again, it's, you know, there's still a struggle both financially and maintenance wise to really understand what long-term really looks like for a domestic well community to flourish. And so again, I know, you know, it is a tough year. It's a tough budget. And, you know, I think that with myself and so many others who are supporting a lot of domestic well communities, I think we can definitely see for this next year that, you know, we can understand better how we can provide services and especially the assistance necessary for communities to actually look into long-term sustainability. So again, just thank you so much again for the opportunity to comment. And I look forward to just kind of really being support to elevate a lot of the concerns for residents on domestic wells. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Islas. I appreciate the comments and continued advocacy and agree that we need to keep our eye on the needs of domestic well communities and acknowledge that it's some of the hardest when it comes to the limited amount of funding and the higher price tag I know that comes with domestic well consolidations and the focus as well on systems that the program has. We're doing our best to definitely try to balance the resources that we have and to make some headway in communities, especially that are a little more prepared perhaps to take on a consolidation project so that we can continue to learn, understand the scope of the challenges we have, and importantly, advocate for the resources necessary to actually tackle this and do it justice here within the state. So just really appreciate the continued engagement with us here and the comments and advocacy for the community. Thank you. Okay. Oh, great. And we have one more commenter here then. Is it Eric Oriana? Okay. Yeah. By all means, come up, Mr. Oriana. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning, Chairman. Very good to be here before you all. Good morning, board members and staff. Sorry for submitting that a little late. Apologies. Well, my name is Eric Oriana. I'm Senior Policy Advocate at Community Water Center. I wanted to comment in response to the final draft of the fund expenditure plan. I saw a lot of good changes and a lot of really robust discussion happening as a result of the Safer Advisory Group meeting and as well as discussions that DFA have had with myself and community members and other partners. So I wanted to thank the board for those changes there. One really good update or good change that is in this final draft is an increase in technical assistance allocation. And I think we're really excited to see that because we were concerned about the focus and attention paid to domestic wells. And so there was that increase, and also mentioned specifically that some of that funding can be used to support the planning for domestic well communities to consolidate. And so I really just wanted to commend that, and overall, really excited about the overall funding effort that the state is providing this year. A big support and big move forward in the fight for safe and clean drinking water for all communities in California. I did want to still update the point about domestic wells. And I was looking at the domestic well strategy for the past few years for the fund expenditure plan. And despite the numbers that we've seen in a needs assessment of about 140,000 domestic wells at high risk, the strategy has been ultimately the same, to look at the data, work with counties to get more data around domestic wells. And then solutions for them has been primarily intermediate solutions or interim solutions. And one, I want to commend the board for stepping up in the space that really, historically the board hasn't stepped into, but there still is a big need to support long-term solutions for domestic well communities. And there's a lot of nuance around who's available, who's responsible. But there isn't nuance in the language of SB 200 that the board should be consolidating domestic well communities. And so that was one of the first and one of the main priorities that the SAFER program was directed to do. And unfortunately, I don't see that continue to be a priority. And so I would really love to see goals set out for consolidating domestic well communities and a goal for how to interact with the rest of the responsible parties. There was discussion around work through the DRIP collaborative. But I would really love to see the State Water Board take more of a leadership role in this position because of how poised the State Water Board is to really help and support and move that conversation forward. So I understand that is probably the big question to do before we you all adopt the plan today. But if you all could direct staff to start on those conversations in this year and in the coming months, that would, I think, really help us be ready for hopefully not the sunsetting, but the time when we discuss the extension of the SAFER program. So thank you for your time and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for those comments and continued engagement, and agree. I think we have an opportunity here over the course of the next year to further sharpen our pencils around domestic wells, and think the DRIP collaborative is a good place to continue to push and commit myself to making sure that we advance the discussion here with all of our many partners that are part of this challenge that we have before us here. So thank you, Mr. Oriana. Appreciate that. Okay, I believe that brings us to the end of our commenters. Looking to fellow board colleagues if they have any further question or comment. Board Member Firestone, please.
I just will echo the thanks to all the staff and stakeholders on this. And I think this is a good reflection of where our priorities are. I really appreciate all the work on having very sharp goals for failing systems, which I think are, an extreme priority and one really a metric of success for the program. And I look forward to seeing us achieving those and accelerating solutions over the next couple of years in particular. And I certainly am committed to, and I know staff are as well, continuing to, as you said, Chair Esquivel, continuing to work on developing more refined, explicit and refined goals on domestic wells, and frankly, I think on ultimately also on at-risk systems as well. I think this is work that we're engaged in, is challenging, requires a lot of collaboration and discussion with stakeholders, not just through the DRIP collaborative, but as everyone has alluded to, also through the various programs like regional management zones and GSAs and such. And I also just want to recognize how challenging this work is in terms of even just coordination across the needs assessment team and the Division of Drinking Water's engagement and district engineers with our Division of Financial Assistance and Office of Public Participation, but then also all of our technical assistance providers that are doing this work on the ground. And then, of course, all of the actual drinking water systems and community leaders that are making this happen. So I just really appreciate it. I'm optimistic and look forward to the next year.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, I appreciate all the work that's gone into the fund expenditure plan. I know with these annual plan updates that it's a continuous process, and you're always working to not only get this plan updated, track the metrics, refine the metrics and everything that's in it, but also get projects completed. And you're managing and juggling all of that. So just thank you for all of your work. It's definitely recognized here. I also have appreciated the 5-year look ahead and just thinking about what are some potential outcomes over the next 5 years as we're in this second half of the SB 200 program. And I appreciate the refinements since the workshop that you've made to the scenarios there to look at a couple of different paths that this program might take, knowing that it's the actual answer will probably be something else, some variant of those two, because really the needs are dynamic and are changing as we go forward. And the needs, as we've seen in the gap analysis for the safer needs assessment, are far outweigh the amount of funding that we currently have available. So it is, I look at it as a ground truth thing to say, hey, we can help a sizable number of water systems and communities and some domestic well communities, but we are not in a position currently to help everyone within the next 5 years, unfortunately. And it's a huge unfortunately. I wish we could. I think we all do, but that's just the reality. And so we'll have to make tough trade-off decisions over the coming years. And I think it's really important to have this annual check-in and refinement and course corrections where it makes sense. And so to that note, I concur with the interest in continuing to explore how we can support domestic well communities and looking at that from a strategic basis. I agree that there's a place with the DRIP collaborative and all of the other Sigma, CV salts, a number of programs that are out there and figuring out where those connections are. But I also think that the Water Board has a huge responsibility when it comes to drinking water quality issues in general, that that is a role that's not replicated elsewhere. I think this is our space to contribute with strategic thinking and understanding of where we're able to support and where we're not, just being transparent and forthcoming about that. So I look forward to the next year here and having more discussions on this and better refining the work that we can do and how we can support other programs that are ongoing, other discussions, and also figuring out a little bit better what our role is in all this. But otherwise, I appreciate the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Morgan.
I'll just echo the thank you for all the work and the presentations today. Really do appreciate just taking a look at the overall program. And as Board Member McGuire said, the 5-year look ahead. In addition, the map was very helpful for me in slide 13 and just looking at the distribution of the funding throughout the state within the DDW sections and the number of felling systems and those that have agreements. That is always helpful just to see kind of where the funding is, how we're moving forward, and looking ahead, because you just look at the number of the systems, but then the amount of funding and agreements that you guys are working on. It's always just amazing. It's not just a couple of agreements that are out there. There's hundreds of them. And just to see that, it's really beneficial and it's really helpful just to see the distribution throughout the state and how much work you guys are accomplishing for the program. And so, I really don't have much to add here on this. I agree, just taking a look and just seeing, our limited amount of funding. And while it seems like really big numbers that we're talking about, when we start translating those into construction dollars, they just don't go quite as far as we would like them to. And just really taking that look of how we can do the most with this limited amount of funding to really get safe and affordable drinking water to as many Californians as possible. Really making that a goal and keeping that as, our sights on that and moving things forward. So I appreciate just this conversation of continuing to look forward and having this space to examine that and really, look at I can't remember how Ms. Hawka said it, but just, these co-equal goals, the priorities of just taking a look at them all together and examining, okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish and how do we get there with the funding that we have, with the systems that, we're looking at, making sure that we get them back into compliance and assisting everyone, throughout the state. So just again, thank you for taking that step back and walking us through it, and then also taking the look forward of where we're going over the next 5 years is really beneficial. So with that, if we're ready, I will make a motion to adopt item numbers four. Sorry, apologies. Item number 4. I keep trying to jump ahead.
Thank you, Board Member. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Many thanks. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member Morgan,
Aye.
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
and Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Item carries, and this year's 5th fund expenditure plan is adopted. So thank you all again for the great work on this. That concludes item number 4. Before we get to item number 5, we do have a commenter from item number 3 that wasn't on the platform and able to provide comment, and would like to go to them now in between these 2 items. So I'd like to call up Adam Wachtel, I believe joining us virtually here.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was dealing with a water line break and then had some technical difficulties. I want to say that, again, thank you. I also work at a laboratory that's a small family-run business. This week, our director has decided not to renew our ELAP accreditation. This is causing dozens of public water systems and small water systems, state small water systems, to be stranded about an additional hour drive from the nearest accredited laboratory. When I started working at this laboratory, I did my best to help us, get up to speed. I tried to reach out to water board staff. Water boards was completely uncommunicative, unhelpful, not competent, and it was extremely disappointing. There was no integrity whatsoever or honesty. There's different answers from all different directions. I found it very disappointing. Meanwhile, I've witnessed a lot of incorrect information from drinking water Division of Drinking Water staff. So I find it very disappointing. I've been trying to reach out unsuccessfully to get a number of issues corrected. So I would like to see a better level of communication from water board staff, a better level of integrity. I'm going to be spending most of the day today explaining to all those public water systems why, they have to drive at least an hour now to deliver samples because of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wachtel. I appreciate those comments and honest feedback from your experience here. And as we had kind of said on the item, we definitely are wanting to remain mindful and ensure that if labs are moving out of their accreditation, that there isn't a hole left and a challenge to smaller labs. So we'll definitely in tandem also make sure we're staying on top of that and ensuring that there's a place for those systems to go. But I truly appreciate your comments here, your feedback, and appreciate your work here. Thank you, Mr. Wachtel. Okay, we'll now then transition to item number 5, where we'll again hear from the Division of Financial Assistance, but now on the 2024-25 Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. And as folks are gathering up here on the panel, just want to appreciate the bringing together of the fund expenditure plan and the intended use plan on the drinking water side. I think that it definitely helps us have a more in one place discussion, if you will, around these two critical funding pots that we use to ensure safe drinking water within the state. So just quick note on that. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Joe said he memorized the entire IUP, so we could start without him. Morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Mike Downey. I'm one of the assistant deputy directors here in the Division of Financial Assistance. And we'll be, as you mentioned, going over the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan for state fiscal year 2024-25 with supplemental IUPs as well. Next slide, please. So this whole presentation today will focus on public comments and any relatively minor changes to the IUP that we made between the draft being posted. And just wanted to summarize that we received about 20 public comment letters. And just wanted to mention that we really appreciate the engagement in receiving all those letters. Communicate with other SRF programs in other states, and there are plenty of SRF programs that have a lot of difficulty getting engagement from utilities and stakeholders. And it actually is very important and helpful to have that feedback as we craft the program together to make something that works for the entire state. So just really wanted to also give a shout out to the project managers, financial analysts, environmental scientists, contract and disbursement analysts, and all the folks that work together on the program and have those touch points with our recipients and applicants, because all the public comments show me that those pathways are being created, that people are aware of what's going on with our policies, and they're engaged in the process. So I think that's really great. I know there's a lot of states envious to some degree with the engagement that we get here in California. And so what we did was we've also posted the public comment letters. We've posted fuller responses to those public comments, along with track changes of the draft intended use plans. And so today I'm just going to go over some of the summary level comments, but if you need to see more detail, anyone interested, that is all posted on our website. Next slide, please. So we were before you, board members, back in July 16th, where we had our public workshop. Since then, the comment deadline has passed, and like I mentioned, we've posted our responses and made a few adjustments to the draft IUP, which we're asking you to adopt today. Next slide. So I just want to give a brief overview of the projects that are on our fundable list this year, concentrating here on the base program. So this doesn't include emerging contaminants and lead service line projects, which are still, I would say in the early stages of the program. So we're just including every application on the fundable list for those two programs. But for the base program, we've limited it to the priorities for this year. If you can go to the next slide, please. So for loan projects, there's 25 projects on the fundable list, and just kind of wanted to give an overview by region, similar to how Jasmine and the fund expenditure plan was divvying it up. And I know you can't read all that, but it's nice to see that every region is represented, and there seems to be good representation across the state. Next slide. So similarly for small communities, and this is where we're focusing on grant and principal forgiveness, 50 projects on the fundable list. And again, some pretty good representation across the state, just grouped by region. And if anyone wants more information on that later that you can actually read, please reach out to me. Overall, the intended use plans represent over 390 applications that were in some form of processing, reviewing, just assisting, getting them complete, trying to prioritize where those land. So, even though I'm talking about 75 projects here that we're really focused on for this year for funding, there's another 320 that someone in Division of Financial Assistance is working on. And that does include the emerging contaminant projects, lead service line projects, and getting those ready for potentially next year, or when there's additional funding sources available. All right, next slide, please. All right, well, I'll jump into specific comments, and then kind of do a back and forth comment page and then response page. And I'll try not to read every single bullet, but try to call out some highlights. So for small community grant and principal forgiveness, had comments, generally talking about, hey, inflation, we need higher funding limits. We got a comment about fire protection projects and how those should be prioritized. Some comments around the memorandum of understanding between California Public Utilities Commission and State Water Board for how CPUC regulated utilities interact with our funding programs, and those are investor-owned utilities. And some comments about charging a fee in lieu of interest to increase grants in the future. So next slide, please. So just a quick response, fire protection as the main project is not an eligible project under drinking water SRF. It's really focused on water quality and compliance. So unfortunately, that's not, regardless of which category we would put it in, those are not eligible. And I wanted to mention that we have gotten some more engagement with CPUC and some of the commenters around how we engage with CPUC and in those investor-owned utilities. A lot of the conversations around consolidations, whether they're consolidating and taking over a funding agreement, or just how the funding is how they're eligible and reviewed. So those conversations are going to be ongoing. Taking a look at the MOU and seeing if it makes sense to do an update, but really just making sure that there are these connection points and seeing where the commonalities are. So it's not a one-off for each investor-owned utility, but really we can make some broader assumptions with how we review and maintain eligibility, how those fit into not only the drinking water SRF program, but some of the other funding sources. As far as the IUP, this year's IUP goes, we did revise the maximum grant and principal forgiveness limits from 60,000 per connection up to 80,000 per connection, just in response to where we're seeing most of the projects land and some inflation and thinking that that's a better price point to make these projects a reality. Also revised the per connection limit for good cause. So we increased that a bit for those special cases. We increased the construction project limit to $8 million from $6 million, and that's a limit for small communities, regardless of the amount of connections. There's kind of just this base cost it takes to get any project off the ground. And then we also made some revisions to grant PF eligibility maximums for medium disadvantaged communities. So in the draft IUP, we had actually removed medium DACs altogether from eligibility, but instead we added them back in with just a more limited amount, but continued that pathway. My understanding is there's not any medium DACs on the fundable list, or that would be impacted this year, but that's more of a looking forward and demonstrating kind of that increased pathway or that sustained pathway for those medium DACs, and in some ways hoping for additional funds in the future when the timing's right. Next slide, please. So these comments grouped together focused on consolidations and consolidation incentives. So general comments is around increasing the per connection limit, generally, expediting and continuing to prioritize consolidation projects. Some specifics around, what could count as a consolidation, and just general processing and process improvements. Next slide, please. So I did want to mention that we're not allowing interconnections and master meter projects to qualify as consolidations. It doesn't eliminate a system, doesn't eliminate a permit, which is really one of the focuses of consolidations. But some of the IUP revisions we did make were to increase the maximum grant and principal forgiveness per connection for consolidations. We also did increase the incentive for consolidation projects from 500,000 up to $1 million. And then we did clarify that we'll continue to continue to prioritize those incentive projects. Not just the consolidation, but one of the big pushes to get those done was the incentive. And so making sure that those are incentivized, prioritized. And it kind of goes along with that last bullet where Deputy Director may utilize previous incentives for those applications that are substantially underway, right? So they're not those incentive The incentive project may not have been executed yet, but we're in those final stages of review and everything's been submitted. And so just, honoring that incentive when they first applied. Next slide, please. All right, focusing on the loan side. So this is generally our medium and large communities. Public comments included support for $50 million limit. This would be the first time that we imposed a limit on the loans, and that's due to demand versus capacity. Also some concerns about the limit and wanting some flexibility based on affordability factors, or thinking about, well, what if there's leftover funds? Could we come back later to increase? And then also comments around existing loans that, where we've executed agreements already and final bids haven't come in, wanting to make sure that there's some flexibility for those. Also some concerns similar to Clean Water SRF around Build America, Buy America, and how that interacts with other federal funding that may have already been secured. So next slide, please. So in general, we'll continue to evaluate cost increases through our final budget approval process. And similar to previous year's IUPs, we already mentioned that is the high priority. Number one priority is to ensure that we can meet the commitments we've already engaged in. And so just to give a little more detail, what we do is we do an evaluation based on the cost increases that we're seeing in combination with potentially decreases, projects that are finishing up, maybe they didn't use all the funding, working with our financial advisor as well on that to make sure our sustainable loan capacity is not impacted in a large way. And for the most part, we've been able to accommodate those past increases. However, that is a good reason to impose a $50 million limit moving forward, at least for this year, because that does help provide some certainty as we move forward through the construction phase and getting these projects finished. Again, more on that, just having that set maximum, just sets clear expectations and lets projects and communities plan now for what they need to complete projects and secure any other funding they may need to. And then I did want to clarify that the Build America, Buy America requirement, we're implementing it exactly as US EPA is requiring. Some of the confusion that we're still working through with EPA is when there's other federal funding, how do these potentially different waivers that other funding programs have awarded, how does that impact our projects, or how does our funding impact their waiver? So unfortunately, just not super clear guidance, but we're working through them on a case-by-case basis. We meet regularly with Region 9 EPA. We meet quarterly with the WIFIA program and EPA staff there. And so we've got a lot of avenues to discuss this, realizing that's top of our priority as well, because Build America, Buy America is an important requirement that we must comply with in order to be in compliance with our capitalization grants, which makes all of this possible. I'll add in that we're not going to require anything for a project that jeopardizes other funding as well. So as much as we do need all of our loan projects essentially to meet Build America, Buy America, just because of the high amount of funding we're receiving from the feds. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? And that burden will be placed on future IUPs, but we can't really just push off all the requirements to next year's list, next year's applicants. We need to demonstrate that we're able to maintain compliance with our programmatic conditions this year in this IUP, and that's one of the purposes of the intended use plan, because we will be submitting this to EPA as soon as it is adopted. Next slide, please. emerging contaminants, general support for our principal forgiveness maximum increase. So that went from $5 million to $10 million. Part of that is also because we received the emerging contaminant for small disadvantaged communities, another funding source that we're pulling together here in the emerging contaminants IUP. This is one of the supplemental IUPs. We also received some comments around technical assistance for communities, looking to do further sampling and just awareness around emerging contaminants and in what ways could they be supported. So next slide, please. So we're currently providing technical assistance to small and expanded small DACs, especially those that are exceeding federal MCL for PFAS or a California response level for some of these emerging contaminants. And then we also do have a contract with University Enterprises Office of Water Programs to do sampling for all small DACs across the state. And my understanding is that 1,100 water systems are registered, which is 97% of those that are eligible. And we have scheduled, I say we, Office of Water Programs has scheduled sampling for 3,700 wells. They've actually tested almost 300. So that's a process that's getting up and going and ongoing. Again, really focused on small disadvantaged communities. So, comments also about, well, what about the medium and large communities? So, encourage people to go ahead and submit requests, and we're considering and looking at, do we have the scope and capacity in our existing technical assistance agreements to help folks with that. And so can't guarantee that we could help every medium or large system, but definitely look at the resources we have available. And if we can, that's assistance we'd like to provide. Next slide. All right, this is also my last slide. So just other comments. Here's just a smattering of some of the other comments that we received. In general, when we're talking about, hey, can we use an alternative technical, managerial, financial assessment form? A lot of this is just going to be case by case basis. Reach out to the project managers. We'd like to work with you. Try to make this, we try to make the review process as easy as possible, obviously, on all of us. So definitely supportive of, bringing your individual project issues to the project managers and management team here in DFA, and continue to work towards these complete applications and getting funding out the door. One thing I wanted to point out was comments around designating funds to help systems most impacted by recently adopted state regulations, specifically PFAS and Chrome 6. And so one thing we did do in these IUPs was clarify that, even though you're not out of compliance yet for Chrome 6, because we're trying to help systems meet that limit, we did qualify those as Category C projects so that they can remain eligible for funding and be prioritized on the fundable list. So that's already in the IUP this year. Sounds like that's been very helpful for a lot of systems and also with our DDW colleagues. In general, just wanted to say that we enjoy continuing to work with stakeholders to implement program improvements, application process revisions. We're meeting with the stakeholder advisory group that's been established that includes both clean water partners and drinking water partners. We have separate subcommittee meetings for clean water and drinking water, so we can really dive deeper in on some of the individual program differences. And then we also recently execute our contract with the Environmental Finance Center to help facilitate additional meetings around improvements to the program that kind of hinge off of the report that they helped complete a couple of years ago on some recommendations, so we can further flesh out, some of the specifics and get more in the weeds on what might be implementable in the future. So that's ongoing. And I think at least one commenter asked, hey, can I be involved in that stakeholder group? So don't see why not. We're going to work with the other stakeholders to make sure that get incorporated. So that's ongoing. Continue to find a lot of value in that. And I think that also is one reason we get good comments, good engagement, engaging those stakeholders right outside of just the workshop and the meetings with you all board members. So with that, I'll wrap that up. And if there's any questions, be happy to answer.
Just off the top, again, great thanks to you and the team. I know this is our yearly process when it comes to the intended use plan and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and appreciate that we have a number of different pots that we're trying to do our best to coordinate and make cogent for the water systems and communities here. And so also echo your thanks to them for just the great engagement. They're checking over our decision making. Their engagement and ideas are an important part of why this program is so successful, and getting dollars out and striking a balance, knowing again that we just have so much more need than we have actual resource. So huge just thanks to everyone involved. I feel this is a very balanced and appropriate intended use plan here, and again trying to comb in what are emerging contaminant pots, bipartisan infrastructure law resources, along with just the base program. So much thanks. Yep, Mr. Downey, please.
All right, my nervousness, I did not introduce all the other people up here with me who may be answering any questions as well, and all the team members. So real quickly, Bridget Chase is one of the supervising engineers overseeing most of the small and disadvantaged community projects. Joe Krakowski is our Deputy Director for Division of Financial Assistance. And then supporting DFA from the Office of Chief Counsel is Jean Fung and Lindsay Harms.
For that introduction, and acknowledge the great work that I know the entire team has been putting toward all of this. Looking to colleagues if there's questions or comments off the bat, and then otherwise we do have a series of commenters here we can go to. Okay, hearing none. Let's go ahead and go to our first commenter, who will be Bob Gore, followed by Mark Cerna, Angela Isas, and then Jennifer Capitolo.
Good morning, Chair and Board. Bob Gore from the Gualco Group, representing South Coast Water District. And we have two brief words. Thank you. We appreciate the work of Joe and Mike and their team. This has been a complex project, and we're glad to reach this point. And we will work with the division on our way out the door for an exit interview, because we've been working with WIFIA, state parks, DWR. It's been quite complex. Oh, and that Natural Resources Agency as well. So we'll exchange thoughts on that. And again, thank you very much.
Appreciate that, Mr. Gore. Looking forward to the feedback. Next, I'd like to call up Mark Cerna, be followed by Angela Islas, Jennifer Capitolo, and then Eric Oriana.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Esquivel and members of the Water Board. No, we just want to thank again for the time and the consideration of this item, our WE project. And again, with the Water Board staff members, has been excellent. We appreciate Michael Downey and in terms of all the work that they've done to support our project. So again, no further comments, just we appreciate the time and consideration of our item and the SRF funding for the IUP. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Much appreciated, Mr. Cerna. Next, I'd like to call up Angela Islas, Jennifer Capitolo, Eric Oriana, and our last commenter will be Nick Blair.
Hi, good morning again. Angela Isas here with Central California Environmental Justice Network. So for this item, I'm actually going to just recuse and not comment, but just again appreciate a lot of the updates for this final SRF update for the drinking water. So yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you as well. Really appreciate it. Next, I'd like to call up Jennifer Capitolo, then Eric Oriana, and then Nick Blair.
Good morning, Chair and members. Jennifer Capitolo with the California Water Association. I felt it was important to come today and really just offer thanks to Joe and his team. We've been having a series of meetings over the last 6 or 8 months as we work through how regulated utilities interact with the State Water Resources Control Board. In the past, we had sort of taken a break from applying for grants because they were taxable at the federal level. And when that got changed around a couple of years ago, that priority for our members really heightened to, I think in our strategic plan, it's in the top 3 of being able to access state and federal grant funds and making that really an affordability measure for our customers where we can access those grant funds and be able to offset capital costs. So there's a lot to work through when you don't apply to a grant program for 5 years and then, expect people to, hey, we're here, we're different. The Water Births program really, since 85% of the state is public agencies, it is somewhat focused there. So we have to, just start talking again and have these meetings and look at some of the formats for submissions and different, processes that we go through to try to improve it. But Joe's been great. We've also had legal in quite a few meetings with us. So more work to do, but we're committed. I think one of our public utilities commissioners even recently has questioned us on what we're doing with regards to grants. And we said that we were working with the water board. And I think they made some outreach to your offices to help stress the importance that we're doing this work on our end to get the process moving. So just a big thanks to everyone. And hopefully I'll keep coming back and updating you and we'll have lots of success together. So thanks.
Looking forward to that, and welcome back to the program. And I can appreciate there's complexity that the IOUs operate under, given the cross jurisdiction with the PUC. And just glad, thank you for being there and at the table with us to work through all those complexities. So thank you, appreciate it. Next, I'd like to call up Eric Oriana, be followed then by our last commenter, Nick Blair.
Thank you, Chairman and board members. Eric Oriana on behalf of Community Water Center. I just wanted to share a couple of comments. One, wanted to appreciate the changes made to the consolidation incentives in this year's intended use plan. Those will certainly go a long way to help us help the state reach its goals and help address the failing water systems. And so there's a prioritization for those systems. And so feel as if the consolidation incentives will be a key component of that. And then the next thing, I also wanted to really call attention to the increase in per connection thresholds that the State Water Board has put attention to. I think that's definitely going in the right direction and would just, in the same vein of domestic well communities, as I was talking about earlier, flag again for the need to establish a different per connection threshold for domestic well consolidations, and also just really indicate to staff the importance of these projects and to consolidate a limited number of projects before the end of the SAFER program and in the next coming years as well. So with that said, we had recommended a per connection threshold of 120,000 and 150,000 for domestic wells, 120 for staff approval, 150,000 for deputy director approval. Would love to see that today, if not, hopefully next year. But thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Oriana. I appreciate the work on that, and would like to see over the course of the year further discussion around a potential threshold here for domestic well consolidations, just so that folks can have an understanding of what they're trying to hit here when it comes to projects that we may be able to fund. And as we heard during the SAFER fund expenditure plan discussion, those scenarios that they're not binding, we didn't vote on them, but where potentially up to 5, say, consolidations could be funded, means there's not a lot of capacity there for being able to fund them. But I think putting a threshold in place can help folks understand where they need to be trying to aim toward. So I appreciate that and the feedback and the work. Thank you, Mr. Oriana. Next, I'd like to call up Nick Blair.
Hi, can you hear me?
You can, thank you.
Very good. Okay. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and fellow board members. My name is Nick Blair, speaking on behalf of the Association of California Water Agencies, also known as ACWA. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today as DFA staff works to finalize the drinking water IUPs. I just wanted to make a few remarks. Many thanks to DFA staff for the continued work on the intended use plans and also utilizing the State Revolving Fund Advisory Group to workshop ideas to improve administration of it. We appreciate the increased funding limits for emerging contaminants, continued work with US EPA to communicate on BABA requirements, reevaluation of cost increases due to inflation, and future review of the $50 million cap, as has been addressed in comments made today by Mac Danny. We can understand that funding is limited and that not all projects that are applied for will be fully funded, but we do encourage further and future discussion about use of funds for disadvantaged communities that are located in non-DAC defined jurisdictions, especially if we continue to see challenging state budgets for drinking water projects in the coming years for medium and large agency service territories. We do hope that this can be further discussed in the State Revolving Fund Advisory Group so we can dive into what that might look like when appropriate. And yeah, once again, thank you for the time to speak today ahead of adoption of the IPs. Once again, great work to staff. We look forward to continued work with the board and DFA staff.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Appreciate the comments and engagement across all of this. Thanks for synthesizing. I know a lot of good feedback from water agencies through ACWA. All right, that brings us to the end of our commenters. I did also want to plus up, I do appreciate the adjustments ultimately of the per connection caps there. You know, obviously with inflation as it is and the cost of these projects increasing, I think it's a reasonable thing to do, even though I know it's hard because it allows us to spread less around basically. But I think it's a reflection of the reality of the increasing costs of many of these projects at this point that we definitely see on the back end as well. And when it comes to just the cost increases, and appreciate the good management of the program and making sure that those are even considered here as we adopt funding for new projects here, knowing that if trends are to remain consistent here, we'll continue to see cost increases over the next years, unfortunately. Board members, any comments, questions? Board Member Morgan.
So just want to thank staff again for all the hard work within this program. And also just the, going through the IUP, adding clarifications to help, any of the agencies that are looking for funding. Also a focus on consistency, looking from IUP to IUP and how in the future we can help with consistency from year to year, so that agencies know you can better plan their projects. As we know, these projects are many times are multi-year, and looking at those limits, as Chair Esquivel just stated, as time goes, the projects get more expensive, and so looking at the limits each year to make sure that projects can keep moving forward, and so that we can, bring them to completion. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member. Board Member McGuire.
Yes, I'll echo all the thanks, and I don't really have anything to add except just to say how encouraged I am to hear about the PFAS testing with the small disadvantaged communities that you have, or the Office of Water Program rather, has 97% participation in the testing work. So, I mean, that's great. Actually, that's a lot higher than I would have thought you might get. So I'll look forward to updates on that and the wells, and hopefully good news. But knowing how ubiquitous PFAS is in our environment, I think I'll be ready for any response there. But looking forward to hearing the results.
Thank you, Board Member. Yeah, looking forward to it's going to be a lot of work ahead on PFAS, and a good foundation there when it comes to the testing. Anything further from fellow board colleagues? All right, hearing none, I think we may be prepared for a motion.
Okay, so this time I get to make a motion for item number 5.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member Morgan.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The vote is unanimous and the intended use plan is adopted. Thank you again. Great work. On to next year's intended use plan. And I really appreciate, again, just the great work that's gone into this and the engagement with all the water agencies. So just for planning purposes, we have left here just a couple of items, the significant item being item number 6 here. What we'll plan to do is just work through our agenda and we'll have, then folks can take a late lunch thereafter. But let's go ahead and give ourselves a quick 10-minute break. And we'll come back then and we'll start in on item number 6. And that should bring us back here at about 11:25. Yeah. I stopped. I'm not living that. I'm not on Twitter. Now go to that. I've stopped. It's getting. Yes. You know, this time I don't understand. The alternative that has what about it's mostly like a bunch of boxes?
Sean, I'll be upstairs if you need anything.
Okay. It's great. I was ready for that alternative. Each have well, I think what I always say one of them yeah, but put my microphone on speaker and for anyone that's online broadcast. That was my little I'm glad we talked about it. Now we have we have a plan B. All right, everyone, we're at 11:28. We can begin to bring ourselves back here. And I have a small script to read here for the next item. Our next item is item number 6, which is a hearing to receive public comment on the draft utility, wildfire, and similar operations and maintenance activities, Clean Water Act, Section 401, Water Quality Certification, and Waste Discharge Requirements General Order, and associated CEQA draft Environmental Impact Report. Today, we're here to listen to oral comments. No state board action will be taken today. The written comment period ends at noon on August 30th. We will start with a brief presentation from staff on the purpose and content of the general order. The staff presentation will be followed by public comments on the draft documents, beginning with a presentation from representatives of California's electric utilities. Jean Bandura and Sean Agarwal from the Division of Water Quality will now proceed with the staff presentation, and just appreciate everyone's good work on this important item.
Good morning. I'm Jean Bandura, a senior environmental scientist overseeing the watersheds and wetlands permitting team that has been working on development of the draft utility wildfire general order, which is the project we're here to discuss today. I'm here with fellow water board staff, engineering geologist Sean Agarwal, section manager Paul Han, and legal counsel Serena Liu, along with our division lead, Phil Crater. Here's a snapshot of this item's agenda. First, I will cover the purpose of today's hearing, provide background on the project, and outline its purpose and scope. I will also summarize the project's environmental impact report. Sean will then discuss the draft order in a bit more detail, including covered activities and water quality protection measures, along with next steps in the development timeline. Next slide. The purpose of today's item is twofold. One, we are here to provide an overview of the general order. Today's overview is high level. The project's comment period began on June 28th, and a staff workshop was held on July 23rd that provided a more in-depth overview. Importantly, we're here to accept oral comments on the draft order and environmental impact report. Comments can be provided either by speaking at today's hearing or commenting in writing via email or mail by August 30th. Again, the State Water Board will not take any action during today's hearing. Next slide, please. I'd like to now provide some background on Senate Bill 901, which is a key reason for developing this general order. In 2018, the California legislature passed Senate Bill 901 to address the increasing frequency and severity of wildfires in the state. Senate Bill 901 mandates additional requirements for electric utility wildfire mitigation plans aimed at reducing the risk of utility wildfire ignition. These plans include activities such as vegetation management, system hardening, and pole replacements, work that in turn requires access road improvements. These are earth-moving activities that could potentially discharge waste into waters of the state and affect water quality. Next slide, please. There are 4 main reasons why we are proposing this general order. The Water Board's top priority is safeguarding water quality, and we understand that wildfires significantly threaten water quality. For example, the photo on the slide might look like a road, but it actually shows sediment filling a stream channel due to runoff from the McKinney fire. As noted on the previous slide, Senate Bill 901 introduced new wildfire management plan requirements to boost wildfire mitigation and keep up with the growing pace and scale of related activities. We value the vital public safety work done by the utilities, which can help prevent situations like the one shown in the photo. While utilities play a key role in preventing wildfire, their response activities, which often involve significant earth moving, can lead to waste discharges if not managed properly. And we want to make sure we don't trade one problem for another. This permit also aims to establish a consistent and reasonable management approach for permitted activities across the state. It's designed to align with other environmental permits, ensuring comprehensive protection. The current process, which requires individual permits for each project, is resource intensive for both utility and water board staff. Our 4th goal is to create a framework that allows electric utility projects to be covered more efficiently, ensuring consistent regulation while maintaining our commitment to water quality. Next slide, please. Moving on to the scope of the project. Since electric utility activities are conducted throughout the state, the geographic scope is statewide. However, the general order does not cover activities in urban area, or rather it's not proposed to cover activities in urban areas, unless they're within a California Public Utilities Commission high fire threat district. Urban areas have different requirements that did not seem appropriate to propose for coverage in the draft order. The general order covers wildfire prevention, post-fire response, and operation and maintenance activities that result in soil disturbance. It's important to note that the general order serves as both a 401 water quality certification under the Clean Water Act to regulate discharges to a water body within state and federal jurisdiction. In addition, electric utilities outside of a water body that are near waters or in a high-risk environmental setting can also discharge waste to waters of the state. And that's where the water code steps in to establish waste discharge requirements. In other words, this order applies to work within a delineated water body, in addition to certain activities outside of waters of the state that have the potential to result in a discharge. Next slide, please. Before we get into the general order covered activities and conditions, I want to briefly go over the related environmental impact report. The State Water Board is a lead agency under the California Environmental Quality Act. The environmental impact report analyzes the potential impacts from the issuance of the general order. The environmental impact report contains a statement of overriding considerations for unavoidable, significant, and potentially significant environmental impacts to aesthetics, cultural resources, and tribal cultural resources that may result, from the covered activities that Sean Agarwal is now going to describe in a bit more detail.
All right. Thank you, Jean, and members of the board. Next slide, please. This slide lists the 12 activities covered by the general order. To make sure the general order was in line with the work being conducted in response to SB 901, this list covers the activities utilities conduct when completing wildfire mitigation and response activities. Since utilities conduct similar work during operation and maintenance of existing infrastructure, and this work can also require a permit, we propose to cover those activities within the general order scope as well. During scoping meetings, we received feedback from stakeholders that these activities are conducted across various landscapes and in some instances do not impact water quality. In response, we refined our scope to include a risk-based approach focusing on soil disturbing activities that occur close to waters, on steep slopes, and on erodible soils. Next slide, please. The general order establishes criteria for when coverage is or is not required based on the activity's distance from waters, the land slope, and the soil erodibility. The rationale for using this criteria is that soil disturbing activities that occur close to waters, on steep slopes, and on erodible soils are more likely to impact water quality. The photo on the left is an example of wildfire response activities following the 2021 Dixie Fire in Northern California. In this area, utilities were replacing poles and towers and constructing new access roads. This photo exemplifies the large scale of soil disturbance, the steep erodible slopes, and the close proximity to surface waters, as you can see on the left side of the photo. Next slide, please. The table on this slide shows the activity categories. There are two categories for enrollment based on risk to water quality, Category A and Category B. Category A is non-notifying. In other words, Category A does not require submittal of an application. To qualify for Category A, the project must meet 4 criteria and still must adhere to applicable general order conditions. The notifying Category B is for higher risk projects that don't meet the Category A criteria. Category B also includes a subcategory for wildfire and response activities, which has a shorter notification requirement. Next slide, please. I want to give a broad overview of the general order conditions in section 4. Some examples of key conditions to ensure the protection of water quality include having an on-site environmental monitor during active construction. This is to make sure that the plans and requirements written on paper are being followed out at the site. Implementing construction best management practices for things such as erosion and sediment control, spill and leak prevention, waste management, and access route and stream crossing design. Conducting visual water quality monitoring during in-water work to make sure that construction-related pollutants are not being discharged to surface water. Preparing and implementing an erosion and sediment control plan. And in addition to water quality protection measures, the general order also has conditions to ensure the protection of tribal and cultural resources. Next slide, please. Now I want to go over the implementation timeline and next steps. We held a staff workshop on July 23rd to help answer clarifying questions about the general order. The board hearing is today, and we anticipate to present the order for adoption in February 2025. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to reiterate information about the comment period. We are accepting written comments until August 30th. For instructions on how to submit written comments, please refer to the public notice document, which can be found on the webpage link shown on this slide. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time. This is the end of our presentation. If you have any follow-up questions after this hearing, please feel free to email myself or Jean. And I'll hand it back to you, Board Member Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal. Thank you, Ms. Bandura. And thank you for the team behind all this work. It's certainly front of mind as California continues to battle wildfires, just the importance of this work here to better create here some efficiencies and protections ultimately as activities are conducted both to fight wildfires, but also post-wildfire. This general order is just incredibly needed. And so just really thank the work that's gone on to this, the work with sister agencies as well, knowing that, we, along with CAL FIRE and other agencies across the state have a role here when it comes to protecting water quality and our various missions. And so just appreciate that and appreciate the engagement. I know we have a panel here that we'll hear from in a moment. Look forward to hearing feedback on its development, ways that we can continue to improve this. And for me, no questions off the bat, but looking to my fellow board colleagues in case they have any question or comment that they would like to provide. Okay, hearing none, we can move on to our panel here. Again, thank you. And so I believe I'd like to call up a panel here with Richard Haywood, Emily Newell, Tamara Spear, and Collier Stapleman. And if you want, you can each go one at a time here. Thank you. Appreciate it. Good to see you. The mic need to be turned back on.
I see the green light. Good morning to the board. Good morning, staff. My name is Kyler Stapleman. I am the Dredge and Fill Program Manager within PG&E's water quality team. I'm joined in person today by a colleague, Carmen Fulis, Construction Stormwater Program Manager, and our manager, Tim Andrews. I'm also joined virtually by members of, as you mentioned, Southern California Edison, Rick Haywood, San Diego Gas and Electric, Tamara Spear, and Emily Newell with Pacificor. And together we'd like to present you with the following deck about the utility, wildfire, and similar O&M activities general order. Next slide, please. Thank you. Before we get into the body of the presentation, I wanted to provide everyone with a brief overview of what you can expect to hear. We'd like to start with a brief expression of gratitude for the partnership and collaboration that we've had with staff getting to this point. And after that, we'll express some concern we have with the general order and how it may interfere with meeting our wildfire mitigation commitments. Following that, we've identified some key implementation challenges we've shared with staff and like to also discuss with the board. And in thinking about what those challenges are, opportunities for further streamlining. To set the stage for what we propose for further streamlining, we want to walk the board and staff through what we feel is a low-risk project and how that might be regulated by the general order. Following that, we'll describe some opportunities, including refocusing the project description on higher risk activities while allowing the lower risk activities to proceed on a programmatic approach that has more streamlining embedded within it. Finally, we'll close with a few additional key discussion points with some conclusory remarks. And with that, I'll pass it off to Tamara Spear. Are you here with us, Tamara?
Yes, can you hear me?
You can. Good morning.
Good morning. I'll try the video here just to say hi at least. Good morning. I'm happy to be here speaking. My name is Tamara Spear. As Kyler said, I'm a senior environmental specialist with San Diego Gas and Electric. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off now. But hello to everyone. So as Kyler mentioned, I'd like to talk to you about partnership. And we really like to express our appreciation for this opportunity to provide comments and feedback to the state board in the development of this general order. We've been embracing the transparency aspect of it, and we look forward to further coordination. As I said, we look forward to continued partnership and collaboration as the general order gets finalized. Thank you. And we just appreciate how much hard work it's taken for the staff to really get to this point. So again, thank you on that. Next slide. So wildfire mitigation obstacles. I'll go ahead and read this excerpt from the Senate bill or from the SB 901. Wildfires directly and indirectly impact water quality through discharge of sediment, increases in erosion, removal of vegetation cover, and breakdown in soil structure. This general order seeks to facilitate wildfire prevention work to reduce these risks to water quality posed by wildfires and to facilitate post-wildfire response activities that help mitigate the negative water quality impacts caused by the fire or by the wildfire. So one of our concerns is that the general order could potentially impede our ability to meet our wildfire mitigation commitments as outlined in Senate Bill 901, which is avoiding wildfires through being able to do maintenance, do the vegetation management required so that we are not somehow contributing to starting a fire as well. So the more upland work will be subject to permitting under this general order, which could slow down the execution of high fire threat district program, which is program under the wildfire mitigation plan. We prefer to focus resources on work execution to meet wildfire mitigation plan risk reduction targets while protecting water quality rather than administrative tasks. Next slide.
And that goes back to me. So the utility representatives here today, we're environmental professionals with subject matter expertise in water quality. Our 9-to-5 jobs are focused on ensuring our utilities comply with water quality regulations, while also effectively operating, maintaining, and constructing a safe and reliable electric grid. As we've been meeting over the past almost 2 months now to develop a shared understanding of what this general order means for operations, we've identified a key issue area with this general order, and that's primarily the volume of activities that would be subject to permitting under the general order. We feel that this workload and volume issue is something that utilities would struggle to implement, and regional board staff may struggle to administer. So we were only just able to start looking at quantifying what the general order would mean in terms of covered activities. What we've been able to find so far is that we believe there would be tens of thousands of individual covered activities under the general order. And of those tens of thousands of covered activities, we're expecting that would turn into thousands of permit applications annually. And when we think about what the conditions of the general order require of those covered activities, full-time monitoring for each covered activity could result in dozens to hundreds of full-time biological monitors just to comply with the general order. And when we think about reporting requirements, there's about 7 reports required for each NOI, which could result in tens of thousands of reports annually. So when thinking about these issues, the volume issue, the monitoring issue, and the reporting volume, we've identified some key streamlining opportunities we want to share with you today. Next slide, please. So we've identified what I'll call like a 3-pronged approach to streamlining the permit. When each of these prongs are implemented together, we feel would alleviate some of the burden felt by utilities during implementation. This approach would focus our resources on higher risk activities and streamline low risk activities, all while protecting water quality. So what those are is the first prong, modifying the project description to reduce the geographic scope of the permit for low risk activities. 2, redefining the category A, that is non-notifying, non-reporting category, the eligibility criteria to capture more low-risk activity, especially those performed in uplands. And lastly, revising the category A permit conditions to rely on programmatic approaches to compliance. Next slide, please. And with this, I'll pass the baton off to Rick Hayward with Edison.
Thanks, Kyler. Can you guys hear me?
And thank you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, board members. My name is Rick Hayward. I'm with Southern California Edison. I am the Wetlands Program Manager. And these next few slides are intended to provide an example of some of the challenge projects that we see in the draft general order as it is, and how they could maybe fit into one of the solutions Kyler just went over. So this is an actual pole replacement that happened in 2023. And we tried to give you some of the project information. This is located in the Ventura area. On the left side with the aerial map. The center map indicates the soil erodibility factor, and that falls within the 0.2 or greater outlined in the general order. And lastly, the aerial on the map on the right just indicates that it is a tier 3 high fire location for the project. The project itself right now would not typically need a 401 or WDR under the water regulations. It's in an upland location. It is, however, located on a pretty good slope. And like I mentioned, it has that soil erodibility factor. And it is within about 50 feet from a stream. So I just wanted to kind of lay the framework for you. Next slide, please. So these 3 photos just kind of demonstrate the before and after photos of the replacement itself. Excuse me. You can see the photo on the left pre-construction. It's a grassland. This area is actually actively grazed. The center photo and the right photo are post-construction. And the purpose of showing these photos is to demonstrate a typical pole replacement project, and the disturbance caused by that tends to be really, really small. And hence our concern is one of the challenges outlined in the general order would be this would be now subject to permitting, whereas currently it is not. So I just wanted to provide that from a square footage perspective of disturbance. Next slide, please. And taking that information into account, the column on the right is kind of our current process. And I have SCE here, but really all the utilities have a very similar process when it comes to environmental review. That includes a basic project intake. We then do an environmental review of the project for all resources, biological, cultural, and waters. And in the example shown, the project falls outside of waters. So we apply our own internal measures, our good housekeeping measures, BMPs, those sorts of things for the project to ensure there is no environmental disturbance beyond what the footprint is. And this time frame is about 30 to 60 days to go from start to being released to construction. Also, we will apply a construction monitor when it's appropriate. That project in particular did have a monitor because we were within proximity to those waters. Looking at that same project under the draft general order as it's written, we would again have the intake and the project review, but that would include that slope K-factor evaluation. This project would qualify for needing permitting under that general order. And therefore, you have all the additional work associated with the field work, surveys, reports, permit application, and submittal, and then the actual permitting process with the board. And in total, we're looking at, approximately 135 days, or about double the time it would take for non-permitting that same work. Again, we would have the monitoring as before. So really, we're trying to provide context here to what some of those challenge projects are as we look at the general order the way it is. And that is the end of my slides. I'll turn it to our next presenter. And I wanted to take 1 second to recognize the board team that's been working on this. The utilities have been working with the folks for, gosh, a couple, 3 years now to get to this point. So all that effort is really appreciated. And I will turn it over.
Thanks, Rick. My name is Emily Newell. I'm here on behalf of PacifiCorp, and I would also like to express my gratitude to staff for all the coordination to date, and we do look forward to that continued collaboration. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about refocusing the general order on high-risk activities. So based on the challenges that were identified in the previous slides, utilities would like to take a step back to ensure the general order is focusing on activities that have a high risk of impacting receiving waters. The general order currently puts quite a bit of focus on activities in uplands by using slope and soil stability as a criteria, independent of proximity to waters. And so we suggest rethinking that concept from a risk to waters perspective. We do acknowledge that larger projects in uplands may pose higher risk to water quality, such as access roads, undergrounding, large staging areas, things of that nature. However, small, short duration projects with minimal ground disturbance, such as pole replacements, routine vegetation management work, pose little risk to water quality, particularly when performed in uplands. So, to refocus regulation on high risk activities, we propose looking at options to reorient the project description in the general order toward those high risk activities. Some options that the utilities have identified are removing low risk activities entirely from requiring coverage, removing slope soil erodibility criteria for routine small scale activities, such that those activities would only require coverage if they are proximate to a water of the state. Considering establishing soil disturbance thresholds as eligibility criteria, and also considering exempting specific project types, such as routine O&M work like pole replacements, vegetation management work, activities that are performed routinely to maintain safe, reliable, and operable facilities. Additionally, we also suggest looking at options for revising Category A eligibility criteria to capture low-risk work. So this means making adjustments to the criteria so more activities would fit under Category A rather than B. Some options that we've identified include removing slope soil erodibility criteria as a Category B trigger, and also considering receiving water risk in determining work category. So there's a lot to think about and consider. So we believe having some additional time in the comment period to thoroughly think through and analyze options would be beneficial for all parties as well as the environment. Next slide, please. Further streamlining of Category A activities is another opportunity to address the implementation challenges utilities have identified. I'd like to point out that we do appreciate what has been done already in the general order to streamline processes, and we've identified some additional opportunities in two main areas. One is the heavy use of programmatic plans and processes. As Rick mentioned, we, the utilities, do have existing processes to perform environmental screening, and we'd like to continue using those. We'd also like to use programmatic erosion control plans that can be used as a pick list rather than developing site-specific planning documentation. And this would require adjusting and refining language in the general order. Another streamlining opportunity is to use a risk-based inspection approach. As currently written, or as we understand it, the general order requires daily monitoring during active construction near water and a minimum of 4 inspections per year for both Category A and B work. So this would be, multiple thousands of monitoring events annually, many for activities that are small, short duration, and distant from a waterway. This poses a significant challenge, and we feel the time and resources required to comply may not be commensurate with the risk to waters that would be posed by many of the activities requiring that monitoring. Therefore, we again suggest refocusing on high-risk activities, and this could mean focusing monitoring on activities that are identified as high risk. It could mean performing QA/QC inspections or spot checks on activities during construction. and also targeting a percentage of activities that would be inspected or field audited. So again, a lot to think about and analyze, and again, some additional time to comment would be helpful. Next slide, please. So this slide includes some additional discussion topics that we aren't able to go into as much detail today due to time, but are still concerned for utilities. The first is an extension request. The utilities request an additional 30 days to review and provide comments on the draft general order. As we've shown in this presentation, there are a lot of significant items that we feel need additional time and thought to get right and better serve all parties as well as the environment. Utilities also request sufficient time before the effective date of the order. It will take considerable time and resources to get processes and databases in order to comply with the general order once final. Also worth mentioning is the need to better clarify the definition for controllable sediment discharge source. We feel this definition isn't clear to us as it's stated in the general order, and it's important to clarify because a significant monitoring effort does hinge on the definition. Regarding GIS data sources, GIS screening is going to be necessary to identify projects that could require general order coverage. So the Water Board should provide standard data sets so all utilities are working from the same information and expectations. These data sources should also be relatively easy to use and process. For instance, the slope database that was provided previously is difficult to process, and we feel that some smaller utilities may not have adequate resources to use it effectively as well. So that's an additional consideration. Regarding tribal and cultural resources, cultural resource specialists have indicated that, and so we request a standalone meeting list so the experts in the field can discuss and find workable solutions. Regarding paleontological resources, we do ask that mitigation measures should focus only on activities where the EIR identified potential for significant impacts, not all activities. So we request that those mitigation measures are revisited to ensure that, again, they're targeting the high-risk activities. And finally, at least on this slide, our annual fee adjustments. We ask the board to consider alternative ways to assess filing fees and annual fees. And I believe I am turning it back over to Kyler. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I'd just like to close with some summary remarks. As Emily mentioned, the utilities are requesting an additional 30 days to provide written comments to the board. As I hope we've described, there are some very real and large implications to our business operations and our ratepayers that we'd like more time to thoughtfully consider. For our proposed comments on refocusing the general order, again, we'd like to see the general order move to a place where it's really targeting the higher risk activities that have potential to discharge waste to waters of the state, and expanding the category A bucket of work to capture more of those low risk activities, including routine pole replacements as Edison described to the board today. And all of this is so that we can make sure that the general order avoids unnecessary delays to our wildfire mitigation activities. That's of utmost importance to us in our day-to-day work, and that's where, we'd like to see this general order more effectively and efficiently streamline those activities. Lastly, as others have pointed out, we look forward to continued collaboration with board staff in shaping the final order. So with that, appreciate your time and have a good day.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments and the self-organizing here to provide us some coordinated feedback here on the utility order. And there's the work and the development of it as well. To your point, I know definitely the balance here is to not try to harm what are a lot of important mitigation goals and need out there to prevent catastrophic wildfire and try to better treat the landscape, but still yet ensure we're doing that in a way that's protective of water quality. I know staff here have obviously already taken their best turn at trying to make sure we are focusing on high risk activities and not being unduly burdensome, but hearing certainly that we have some opportunity here for further refinement. So appreciate that. I know we have a few other commenters and we can make our way through them and look forward to hearing from any questions or comments from board members as well. All right, next I'd like to call up Tim Andrews, who will be followed by Jian Lee, and then Susie Berlin. And I believe our last commenter then will be Michael Esposito.
Morning. My name is Tim Andrews. I manage the water program for Pacific Gas and Electric Company, and I'm honored to be here today to speak on the proposed general order. I'd like to open with a note of gratitude for the State Water Board staff. Since the release of this public draft of this general order, your staff has maintained a spirit of collaboration as we work toward a shared objective of meaningful water quality protection. PG&E is the largest utility in the state, and we provide energy services to approximately 5.5 million households throughout a 70,000 square mile service area in Northern and Central California. The geographically diverse service area contains tens of thousands of circuit miles of interconnected electric transmission and electric distribution lines with associated supporting facilities that require maintenance to ensure continuous operation and delivery to our customers. As is currently written, this general order will require applications for thousands of low-risk PG&E maintenance activities that were previously not subject to regulatory permitting. Neither PG&E nor the regional water boards have the staff to handle this volume. Contextualizing the implications of the proposed regulations for just one of the permitted activities. PG&E trims, prunes, or removes approximately 1 million trees annually in accordance with our wildfire mitigation plan commitments and our public resource code requirements. These will be impacted by the new administrative burdens under this order. If the general order is adopted as written, vegetation management would account for more than 90% of PG&E's work that would require permitting under the order, and about half of that work would be performed in uplands, sometimes at great distance from waters. PG&E customers pay approximately $20 a month to support PG&E's vegetation management work. The additional costs associated with compliance with this general order may cause this figure to rise, further impacting customers' bills at a time of increased affordability concerns. PG&E believes that the shared administrative burden, as well as the financial burden borne by our customers associated with implementing the general order, is considerable, and that this regulation should be tailored to better address the highest risk to water quality and aquatic resources. While the public draft has made important progress toward a reasonable and implementable permit, more work does remain to be done. PG&E would like to continue to work with the state to explore programmatic opportunities to streamline this order so it may more readily be implemented both by industry and the regulatory community. PG&E will need to adapt other portions of our project delivery pipeline to accommodate the State Water Board's proposed regulation. And with this in mind, PG&E would like to impress upon the board a need for sufficient change management timeline or period between adoption and implementation. Thank you for your time and your consideration of our input.
For that input, Mr. Andrews. Next, I'd like to call up Jen Ann Lee, followed by Susie Berlin, and then Michael Esposito.
Hi, good morning, Chair Esquivel and board members. Jen Ann Lee here from the law firm of Braun, Blazing and Wynn, representing the California Municipal Utilities Association, CMUA, whose members provide electric service to about 25% of California. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the State Water Board's draft utility wildfire general order. We will be submitting written comments with the Northern California Power Agency and the Southern California Public Power Authority. And collectively, our associations represent all public power in the state. We have been working with staff on this draft GO for the past year and a half and appreciate the responsiveness to our questions. We provided comments on the administrative draft released last May, and we're pleased to see many changes made in this draft based on those comments. However, we continue to be concerned with the scope of the utility wildfire GO and the resulting administrative burden on core utility functions. While we agree that this proposal provides streamlined permitting for those activities that will result in a discharge to waters of the state, the draft GO also adds additional administrative burdens for critical project activities that do not clearly impact water quality. Specifically, the draft GO imposes additional requirements and conditions for the majority of the transmission and distribution work that an electric utility performs. This broad scope will be costly for utilities to implement and often includes activities with a very slight chance of causing impacts to waters of the state. And so the draft GO must be revised to focus on streamlining the permitting process for projects that will impact waters and eliminate project categories, triggers, and conditions for projects without a reasonable chance of causing discharges to waters of the state. We support excluding urban areas from the draft GO's scope, but we oppose the inclusion of urban areas within high fire threat districts. The draft GO excludes urban areas because they are characterized by impervious surfaces. Urban areas are unlikely to cause erosion and sediment contributions like in rural areas, and may be better addressed by a different permitting scheme. However, this rationale does not change for the urban areas within high fire threat districts. So the project activity will still be conducted on impervious surfaces and does not really present a greater risk to water quality. Creating exclusions and then exceptions to the exclusions will result in unnecessary complexity for utilities that are trying to implement the GO. We are also concerned with including groundwater within the scope of GO. Unlike surface water, which has discrete delineations, it is difficult to determine whether a particular activity will have impacts to groundwater and should not therefore come under the purview of the GO. And lastly, we encourage the State Water Board to tailor the draft GO to minimize the administrative burden on electric utilities by narrowing the scope of the draft GO not only capture those activities that will specifically result in impacts to waters of the state. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide these comments.
Thank you for those comments and engagement, Ms. Lee. Next, I'd like to call up Susie Berlin and then last commenter, Michael Esposito.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, Chair Esquivel, board members, and Water Board staff. My name is Susie Berlin, and I'm providing comments today on the draft utility wildfire general order on behalf of the Northern California Power Agency and the Golden State Power Cooperative. NCPA is a joint powers agency whose members include 16 publicly owned electric utilities, and GSPC is a statewide association representing California's rural electric cooperatives. NCPA and GSPC electric utilities are committed to providing reliable and safe electricities to their customers and member owners, which includes carrying out operations and maintenance activities related to wildfire mitigation and restoration. We appreciate staff's outreach to stakeholders in developing the draft GO and incorporating the feedback that has been provided. We fully support the stated objective of the utility GO to streamline permitting. Having a streamlined permitting process to facilitate important wildfire mitigation work when those activities result in discharge of waters to the state is a laudable goal. However, as the Joint Electric Utility Panel noted, the GO goes well beyond activities that may result in discharge into waters of the state, and rather than streamlining, would potentially impede the ability to do this important work, create additional permitting, reporting, and compliance requirements, and place a financial burden that would be borne by utility ratepayers. To be clear, NCPA and GSPC understand and share staff's concern about wildfire risks and the resulting impacts that wildfires have on waters of the state. However, not all activities related to wildfire mitigation and restoration have the same potential impact on water quality. The draft general order must be refined to ensure that the permitting requirements therein apply only to project and activities that will impact waters. As drafted, the GO includes project triggers and conditions that have no nexus to potential discharges. Staff has noted that the risk-based approach takes into account distance from waters, land, slope, and erodibility. However, the draft GO includes triggers that do not take into account proximity to surface waters like upland projects. I will not reiterate all the important points that were in that joint presentation, but I do encourage the board and staff to look closely at the specifics that were set forth, why we believe that this GO would provide a streamlining approach for some projects, but in overall as drafted would expand the scope and administrative burden without a nexus to increased risk of discharge. And we therefore urge the board to amend the draft to ensure that it applies only to activities that will result in impacts or discharge to waters. NCPA and GSPC appreciate the work staff has put into this GO, and we look forward to continuing to work with staff and other stakeholders on refining the GO to ensure that it meets the stated objectives without adversely impacting the important work that the utilities do. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you as well. I appreciate the engagement and the comments here. Next, I'd like to call up Michael, and I believe this is our last commenter, Michael Esposito.
Good morning, board members. Michael Esposito with CAL FIRE, the Forest Practice Administration. I don't have any comments this morning, but I thank you and appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Thank you as well. Appreciate the attendance and engagement on the item nonetheless. Thank you, Mr. Esposito. All right, that brings us to the end of our commenters here. I want to appreciate everyone's engagement. Again, this is an important general order and important we get it just right, given its potential impact to what are important mitigation activities that are ongoing. But I appreciate the acknowledgement from folks about the need to here be able to ensure that we're protecting water quality even as those activities are undertaken. I guess first off, just on the request for additional time for public comment, want to see how folks are feeling. I'm generally supportive. I don't know if 30 days is a bit too much, but want to see what reaction might be on allowing for a little more time for comment, knowing that we have about 10 days here until the current comment period ends.
We intentionally gave a long comment period of 60 days to allow for ample time to review and prepare comments. So I don't personally recommend an additional 30 days. The comments I heard today were around the ability to work with staff to come up with alternative language. We typically do that once we receive the comments, and we've been working in good faith with the utilities over the last several years to get to the point where we are now with the utility order, and we intend to continue those conversations. So I don't recommend an additional 30 days. I think I would very much like to start having those conversations and not wait for the rest of the comment period to initiate that and get this one over the finish line.
Appreciate that, Ms. Mogus. And here do acknowledge that, it's been a couple of years of development here. And so folks have been engaged with the material for a time. 30 days is I think a long time to add for additional public comment. But, again, I think if we were to add some additional time, a week or two at most, I don't know if that necessarily satisfies the need that could be, certainly spent and time spent on the regulation. And to your point, it doesn't preclude the ability to jointly be drafting alternatives. It's just really around our ability to close the book, if you will, and be able to start to process those comments and understand where we go next with the regulation. Appreciate that. Was there anything, I guess, that folks heard here in the staff and in the program that wanted to respond to? I think, the general flavor of comments was, again, trying to better strike that right balance. And I know folks are interested in trying to do so, but don't know if there's any specifics you all wanted to make sure you comment on.
Yeah, I want to thank the utility companies for coming and working with us productively on this.
Utility companies have mentioned repeatedly that they want to make sure that they are addressing the wildfire mitigation plan work. We support that work strongly. As we put in our presentation, one of the largest threats to water quality is the wildfire itself. Nevertheless, we think that there is a need for increasing the number of controls that are done on the utility activities, because those activities themselves can also create threats to water quality. And I think as a state, we need to figure out how to do both, not one or the other. Having said that, we understand and frankly agree with the utility companies that we should be focusing on more of a risk-based approach. We've worked hard to try and figure out how to put that, how to build that into the permit. There's a lot of changes we made from the administrative draft to do just that. Our focus for this draft was to provide a flexible framework that could be used, adjusted based on public feedback. We're glad that the utility companies are supportive of implementing water quality practices, and we look forward to hearing from them on how they would propose to modify those thresholds.
Thank you, Mr. Hand. I appreciate all that. Looking to fellow board colleagues if they have questions, comments, wanting to make here. Board Member Morgan.
Thank you. So I just want to, also just state that, I would also be okay with this in the comment period for, up to 2 weeks, understanding that, we've already provided 60 days and, really do want to keep moving forward. But just, with that, just want to make sure that, we're receiving in the written comments, but want to make sure that staff continue to work with utilities to make sure, we're looking for protecting water quality, but also keeping the work moving forward, because, it is work that is critical. It is critical work, not only in the prevention of wildfires, but then also, these are, the utilities that serve, Californians. And so I want to make sure that we're finding the appropriate balance. And, one thing that I would like to just follow up with staff is just, the anticipated numbers of NOIs and the processing time, making sure that, how we set this up, we're looking at that complete balance and making sure that as the NOIs do come in, we're able to efficiently and effectively process those to keep this important work moving forward. And, making sure that, we do have a streamlined general order and it is, risk-based. And so want to make sure that we do continue those conversations with the utilities and find that appropriate balance.
Thank you for those comments, Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, thank you. This was informative, and I think we all share the concern and desire to move this process forward so that we can have adequate protections as we deal with wildfires. Even this year, they continue to occur at scales that we really haven't seen before. So I think it's important that we move this process forward. That being said, I don't think 2 weeks or 1 to 2 weeks anyway is going to make or break that. And it sounds like the utilities have an interest and see the benefit and would be able to provide some additional specific recommendations with that additional time. And so if that would be helpful to them, I would be supportive of that short extension, knowing that. And I do appreciate that you already built in the 60-day period here. So that is quite a lot of time. It is more than we normally provide. So I, am giving that some thought. So a week or 2 sounds okay to me, if that works. And then I'm in the learning mode here, so I'm still taking all this in. I heard a lot of good feedback from the utility, so I appreciate that input today. I'm going to be continuing to think about that, and certainly we'll be looking at the comment letters when they're submitted and seriously looking at all of those closely. Some of the concerns that I found compelling were the small projects that are short in duration, that are perhaps distant from waters, and how those are best handled. And I don't know enough about this permit exactly in terms of how those projects would fit, or how you might envision addressing that, any risk that might be provided by those. But it was really just a vivid example for me, seeing the utility pole project. And so I think that is a good case study. So I appreciate that being shared. And so maybe thinking a little bit more about projects like that what makes the most sense in terms of monitoring, in terms of BMPs, in terms of risk criteria, and how those might fit within this permit, all with the intent of protecting water quality and streamlining and expediting this process so that the utilities can do the important work that they need to. So just no answers today, but just area of interest as we go forward. And then one, question that we heard from CMUA, Ms. Lee mentioned groundwater connections. And so I was wondering if staff, I wasn't aware of that. So I was wondering if staff could just elaborate, or if they understand what that, the groundwater risk piece of this permit would include.
Yeah, we heard that from CMUA when we met with them last week, I think it was. I'm not quite sure where the connection is. That's something that we definitely want to make sure we explore with them. It's not our intention to be focused on groundwater here. So that's something we want to work out with them. One other thing that I'll mention with regards to the utility poles, we got a preview of this presentation last week. One of the things that we heard from our administrative draft was concern over isolated utility poles. And we agreed at the time that that's really not what staff thought was the thing to propose to the board. So that's an area we definitely want to look into the utility companies with, because if we're still pulling those in, there's something that we need to adjust. And so, that's something we definitely want to look closer into.
Really appreciate that. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Board Member. Board Member Firestone, anything you'd like to contribute? Okay, thank you. All right, well, this isn't a decision point, and as Board Member McGuire said, certainly still digging into the work and looking forward to hearing further in the public comment letters. We'll leave it to folks. I think you heard somewhat of a majority here willing to open up public comment period for an additional 2 weeks, but just appreciate the good work I know that's gone on to this order so far. And without anything further, we can wrap up this discussion then. Appreciate it. And again, thanks for the good work. All right, that brings us to the end of item number 6. We are now on our last item number 7, which is board member reports. Look to my fellow board colleagues if anyone has reports they'd like to report out.
Not have a report.
Thank you, board member. I will quickly say, last week, I had the pleasure of joining the California Water Data Summit down in San Diego, provided a keynote, and then also was on a panel around data-driven conservation and our recently adopted conservation policy. So it was good to be able to connect with folks. Really, it continues to be a lot of excitement and energy around the advances in data analysis, both at the water utility level and certainly here at the state level, as it's been, as I highlighted, just a critical part of the work that we're doing here at the State Water Board, whether it's the Safe and Affordable Fund and our focus on, and the SAFER program and our focus on access to drinking water, or administration of water rights, or discussions around protection of water quality. All of it is data heavy and is central to us being better decision makers in these complex and uncertain times. So it was a nice moment. I appreciated the invite and ability to get down and connect with folks and hear all the good, exciting work that's happening at the local level. And that's the only report I have.
Okay. Well, it had been several board meetings since I had really a board member report to share. And I was so excited to bring it to you to share today, which was that I went and I was spoke at the Environmental Measurement Symposium on August 9th. But ELAP stole my thunder, and they shared that during their presentation earlier. But I will say that it was truly, I think, it was a lot of what we heard today during the item on the update. It was very well attended. There was a lot of energy, enthusiasm in the room that I picked up on, and it was about building on the good work of the regulations, implementing, and moving forward. So it was encouraging to see, and a good chat, I think, with the group there. That's all I had.
Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. And yeah, it is exciting to see just the momentum in the community out there, even with challenges we know that are out there. So thank you. Board Member Firestone, anything to share?
No report today.
Thank you kindly. All right, that wraps up item number 7 and brings us to the end of our numbered items on our agenda. We will go into closed session, not on Title VI, but we will on sites and Delta Conveyance Project. Let's give ourselves a 45-minute lunch, if that sounds okay. And so we can convene back in closed session at 1:15 up in room 2510, Board Member Firestone. And I know the Vice Chair wasn't able to join on the Zoom platform with us, but Vice Chair, if you're listening in, there should be a link there for closed session for you to join virtually. Anything I'm missing, Mr. Wiles, to close out with? Okay, well, again, we'll transition to closed session. Someone will close us out. And then otherwise, our next board meeting is September 17th, because our next board meeting, our first board meeting of September, we don't have enough of an agenda to have, so we'll be canceling that. So we'll see you all here next time on September 17th, almost a month out from now. Hope everyone is well until then. And again, we'll be in closed session and someone will close out thereafter. Thanks everyone for the great discussion and items today.